Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case. The case of Maria Leyon and Laura Dalton. There are individuals who can be described as true parasites. Living off others for extended periods, they are cunning manipulators who constantly exploit their victims. Even more frighteningly, some do not hesitate to take their behavior to the extreme, committing crimes with unimaginable cruelty. On the evening of March 19, 1999, residents of an apartment complex near the Iowa City campus were alarmed by a strong smell of burning and smoke coming from one of the apartments. Some residents stepped outside and saw a fierce fire raging through the windows of a small apartment. They immediately called the fire department. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the fire had already spread, shattering windows and producing thick columns of black smoke. Despite their best efforts, extinguishing the fire proved difficult. Neighbors stated that the apartment was believed to be unoccupied. As the permanent residents were out of town, firefighters initially focused on fighting the fire from the outside before entering the building. Once inside, the smoke began to clear. A desolation scene unfolded. The entire apartment had been devastated. With furniture and belongings reduced to ashes, they found a body lying near the entrance to the hallway. More shockingly, a second body was found in a back room. Both bodies were burned beyond recognition. The first body, located near the door, was less severely burned and was identified as a young woman who appeared to have died from smoke inhalation while attempting to escape. The second body, lying on a bed in a back bedroom. With most of the flesh completely destroyed, it was impossible to identify the victims at the scene due to the severe burns. For this, an examination in the laboratory of forensic experts would be required. Police were quickly called in to investigate the cause of the fire and the deaths. Initial theories suggested that the victims may have succumbed to toxic fumes or suffered an accident, possibly caused by an unextinguished cigarette, since the apartment was a common rental for students during exam periods. Investigators also considered the possibility that the fire was linked to excessive drinking. However, what they uncovered next completely shifted the direction of the investigation. Among the ashes, firefighters found a few items that were surprisingly intact. Among these items, they discovered documents that could help identify the deceased. A driver's license was found in a purse belonging to one of the victims. Following an investigation, the forensic experts confirmed the identities of the victims in there. A victim was identified as 29-year-old Laura Dalton a few days before the fire. Laura had traveled to Iowa City to visit her cousin. Strangely, Laura neither owned nor rented the burned apartment, suggesting she had ended up there by chance. None of the neighbors recognized her. Laura had grown up in the area and lived with her parents before moving away as an adult. However, she often returned to her hometown to visit family and stayed for several days. Iowa City was her favorite place, where she enjoyed spending time not only with her relatives, but also with her friends. It was a charming town where most residents lived modest lives centered around education and part-time work. The second victim, Maria Leyon, was a 27-year-old woman. She came to this town on business. She lived in a rented apartment that was not the one involved in the fire. Maria, like Laura, had no known relationship or connection with the owners of the burned apartment. The next morning, Laura's cousin and Maria's mother went to the morgue to identify the bodies. However, the autopsy revealed a disturbing detail. Both victims had died before the fire started. Their lungs showed no signs of smoke or hot air inhalation, indicating they were not breathing when the fire consumed the apartment. Although the body was severely damaged, the forensic team quickly determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, most likely from a construction tool. While inspecting the burned apartment, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be bloodstains and strands of hair. The police promptly began analyzing these as potential evidence. This evidence later confirmed Their suspicions were right. A barbell was found in the apartment and identified as the murder weapon, as it contained traces of blood from both victims during the apartment search. Investigators also found an empty can, despite severe fire damage. Appeared to be a can typically used for storing and transporting fuel. Meanwhile, the owners of the apartment denied ever storing fuel in their home, so they determined it had been used shortly before the fire. Detectives concluded that the attacker had murdered Maria and Laura, poured gasoline from the can on their bodies and nearby furniture, and set the apartment on fire to destroy evidence. The presence of flammable substances made it clear that this was a deliberate and carefully planned double murder. However, proven facts, not assumptions, were needed to solve the case. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene. A cigarette butt was discovered near the bodies simultaneously. Forensic experts were in for a great surprise, as it turned out that traces of incipient decomposition were found on the bodies. This decomposition will take at least a day after death. No evidence suggested that the bodies had been moved to the apartment after the murders. Most likely, Maria and Laura were killed there, and their bodies were burned several days later. Through investigation, the investigators speculate that Laura was killed on the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and her body remained in the apartment. Maria was killed a day later. On the night between Thursday and Friday, this discovery shocked the police, as they had initially believed the arson was carried out immediately after the murders to destroy evidence. The most puzzling aspect was that Maria had been brought to the apartment where Laura's body had already been decomposing for a day. Laura's friends reported that the last time they saw her alive was on Wednesday evening. That night, the group of friends decided to spend the evening at a bar, and Laura joined them for a few hours. Everyone was having fun, drinking, and relaxing. They tried not to overindulge. During the evening, Laura met a young man who had been sitting at a nearby table for most of the night. As the group became more intoxicated, Laura and the man started talking. Witnesses later admitted they didn't pay much attention to him. The two quickly struck up a conversation, and after some time, the man suggested they go to another bar. Laura initially declined, but eventually agreed. After some persuasion, witnesses stated that this was the last time anyone saw Laura alive. She left with the man shortly before midnight, according to the autopsy report. She was killed not long after. The thing to do now is to find this strange man. Unfortunately, no one knew his name and could not really describe his appearance. The police needed at least some details to begin the investigation. Witnesses were thoroughly questioned to create a rough profile of the unknown man. He was described as tall, around 20 years old or slightly older. With brown hair, witnesses also noted his disheveled appearance. Laura's friends were unaware of what had happened to her. She didn't call them the next day, and she hadn't contacted anyone at all. Laura also failed to attend the group's next party, held at the same bar the following evening. This time, Laura's friend, Maria, was present at the party. Maria's body was also later found in the burned apartment, and it appears she was killed just one day after Laura. Strangely, witnesses reported an almost identical story about Laura. Maria had been drinking with friends, and she caught the attention of a similarly unkempt young man sitting at a nearby table. He appeared friendly and spent much of the evening trying to charm her. The man seemed skilled at gaining trust, easily convincing Maria to leave with him for another party. She failed to recognize the threat and trusted the persuasive stranger. The bar owner also noticed them as they left. He provided the investigative agency with a slightly more detailed description of the man the investigator were searching for. This helped detectives create a more accurate sketch despite the limited information, but the investigation now had a lead. The police also identified his behavior pattern. He observed women in bars for extended periods, waiting until they were intoxicated enough to lower their guard before making his move. In addition, he had access to one of the rented apartments. Either using his own key or the trust of the landlords, the police interviewed everyone, including students. who might have had access to the burned apartment, however, most of them had moved out long ago and no longer had access. For a time, the investigation stalled. In addition to the help of forensic experts and laboratory tests, additional evidence is needed to advance the case. One of the key stages of the work was to conduct an analysis of the discovered empty can. The resulting picture was consistent with what is left by gasoline vapors. The empty can was clearly used to carry fuel, which was poured over the bodies. Among the other evidence found at the scene of the double murder was a matchbox with just one match missing. It appeared the perpetrator assumed the fire would destroy all evidence. However, the fire was extinguished before everything was consumed. Investigators concluded the match had been used to ignite the fire. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the matchbox, leaving it unusable for identifying the suspect. After unsuccessful attempts at investigation, the investigators returned to the scene to look for more clues. By that point, the apartment had been cleaned and organized, making it impossible to find any new evidence. Initially, they had photographs taken at the scene of the fire. In one of the photos, they noticed a pair of suspicious glasses. These glasses matched descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen strangers at the bar days before the fire. Although the glasses survived the fire, they were not listed among the collected evidence. Fortunately, the apartment owner had not discarded them and handed them over to the police. When detectives examined the glasses, they discovered they also did not belong to the former tenants. The most valuable evidence ended up in the hands of the investigators, which later allowed them to obtain a huge amount of valuable information about the criminal to prove his connection with the murders, that these were not ordinary glasses, but ones with special lenses that correct vision. They were checked to determine what vision deviation the criminal had. This helped the detectives narrow down their suspect and determine whether these were his glasses. After that, the police officers had enough evidence and testimony to approximately reconstruct the picture of what happened. They reviewed the chain of events that led to this tragic outcome several times. In the end, the most probable version was recognized as the following. Presumably, both girls died one day before the fire started. The cause of death for each was prolonged beating with a blunt object, likely a barbell. They received head injuries incompatible with life to get rid of traces of the crime. The attacker decided to set fire to the apartment along with the bodies. The attacker appeared to stage the scene to resemble a real-life event. He placed the second victim in the hallway, while the first victim was beaten to death in bed. Afterward, he brought a gas can of gasoline into the apartment and carefully poured it over the furniture, floor, walls, and the victims' bodies. However, his critical mistake was smoking during the process. At the crime scene, forensic experts discovered a cigarette that had been extinguished and was not destroyed by the fire. Initially, no traces of the killer were found on the cigarette. Based on the circumstances, it seems the attacker was bent over, smoking, and pouring gasoline. When the concentration of vapors increased, the cigarette ignited. The resulting flames struck the attacker in the face, causing him to drop his glasses. The glasses were found slightly melted. It being in a less damaged part of the apartment, it is likely that the cigarette ignited the gasoline, triggering a chain reaction. This forced the killer to abandon the gas can, glasses, and cigarette at the crime scene, and assuming they would be destroyed in the fire. However, these items became key evidence. After interviewing the owner of the burned apartment, it was revealed that several valuable items, including 2 expensive household appliances, were missing. The investigators suspected the attacker would try to sell the stolen items, so they focused on local pawn shops. As these are the quickest and easiest places to sell stolen goods, their efforts paid off when they identified a suspect. After speaking with the owner of the pawn shop closest to the burned apartment, the detectives obtained receipts for items matching the stolen goods. Selling property at a pawn shop requires presenting an ID and filling out paperwork, which meant the attacker couldn't avoid giving his real name. This is how the investigators came across John Lee Memmer. John was a 20-year-old unemployed man who was well known in the city since he was a regular at various parties. He knew where to get a free drink, he was a good conversationalist, and was described as a quiet guy. John attended various events after moving to the city. He had been jobless for a long time and didn't have a permanent home. He relied on friends, particularly students, who let him stay in their rented apartments, allowing him to get by. It is important to note that his appearance matches the description of the suspect and also often wears glasses. When the police looked into John's background, they discovered he had previously been conditionally released early for theft and document forgery. Now, John, the main suspect, could face a real prison sentence due to repeated offenses. An investigation also began into his possible involvement in the double murder. Immediately after that, John was arrested, and during interrogation, the police noticed slight burns on his face, including a small burn on his nose. This detail reinforced the detective's suspicion of his involvement in the fire. John appeared nervous and often hesitated before answering their questions. When he realized he was a suspect in the arson and murders, he began changing his story, leading to numerous contradictions. He claimed that, on that night, he broke in and stole several household appliances, which he later pawned. However, he denied any involvement in the arson or the murders of Maria and Laura. Refused to accept those charges, John explained that he had been using the apartment with another homeless man. Because knowing the owners would be out of town for an extended period, he described the second homeless man as suspicious and potentially dangerous. But the investigation could not confirm that this person existed. It seemed likely that John had fabricated the story to shift the blame. The investigators was determined that just a few days after the discovery of the two bodies, John visited an optical store and ordered new glasses using an old prescription. The glasses found in the burnt apartment completely corresponded to the prescription for correcting John's vision. This didn't seem like a mere coincidence. John was unable to explain why his glasses were found in the burned apartment, claiming he had lost them a long time ago. Following this, forensic experts decided to analyze the cigarette butt found at the arson site, suspecting it might contain DNA evidence from the perpetrator. By this point, John had already provided the investigators with samples for analysis. The results revealed traces of saliva and skin on the cigarette butt, which were examined and matched to John's DNA. This breakthrough was achieved using advanced forensic methods introduced in the late 1990s, which had become widely used by police at the time. These things strongly linked John to the crime scene. Though not directly to the victims, John later changed his story, admitting that he had been in the apartment and had snuck in with another homeless person when the apartment renter was not home. He offered a plausible explanation for why his glasses and cigarettes were found there. The police also focused on other pieces of evidence, particularly a leather jacket belonging of Laura, which was found in the ashes. Investigators began searching for traces of DNA. Initially, the jacket was examined under ultraviolet light, but no traces were found. Then, a different method was used to search for fingerprints. The fingerprint on Laura's jacket was identified as John's, however. This alone did not confirm his involvement in the murder. Detectives also examined John's shoes and the clothes he wore on the days of the murders. On one of his shoes, they found two tiny droplets of blood, about the size of a match head. Forensic scientists analyzed the samples and determined that the blood belonged to Maria. It was clear that John had attempted to wash his clothes, but traces of blood remained. Now, the police obtained undeniable proof of his guilt. John was unable to explain how the victim's blood ended up on his shoes. This detail became clear evidence that he had been in contact with Maria around the time of her death. When confronted with the accusations and presented with the evidence, John changed his story yet again. This time, he claimed that he had invited Maria and Laura over. They had been intimate. Then he left first, however, due to the condition of the bodies. This claim couldn't be verified. Forensic experts found no indication of an intimate relationship prior to Maria and Laura deaths. His story was clearly false, and his shifting testimonies only deepened the investigators' mistrust. With all the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office pieced together the chain of events leading to the fire and the double murder. John had gained access to the apartment while the tenants were out of town. There were no signs of forced entry. This easy access to the home alarmed the tenant's owner and moved elsewhere. After meeting Maria and Laura at a nightclub, John waited until they were intoxicated and less alert. He then initiated friendly conversation, flirted, and used his charm to gain their trust. Eventually, he convinced them to go to this apartment. His intention was to pursue intimacy, but neither Laura nor Maria reciprocated his advances. This rejection infuriated him and caused him to lose control. In his anger, he attacked Maria and Laura with a barbell. The severe head injuries they sustained from the blows resulted in their deaths the following day. On Friday, John returned to the scene to destroy evidence and steal household appliances from the apartment to cover his tracks. He set a fire, but made several mistakes, leaving behind significant evidence at the crime scene. A few days later, John was tried on charges of first-degree murder and arson. The defense has stressed that John is not known for being aggressive, although he has a history of minor crimes. He has never physically harmed anyone. Besides, one key point the prosecution has highlighted is the tattoo of 2 teardrops near his eyes, a symbol commonly used in the criminal world to indicate murder. He got these tattoos before attending the trial. However, John claims that the tattoo were merely a tribute to 2 friends who died in a car accident. The prosecution presented a combination of circumstantial and direct evidence to build its case. As John has never confessed to his guilt, the overwhelming evidence convinced the jury that John was the perpetrator. As a result, John Lee Memmer was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He's sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After serving 10 years, John appealed, claiming that the public defenders had failed to do their job effectively. He argued that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, and that his defense team had failed to adequately challenge it. The appeal was considered by the court. However, after a retrial, he was found guilty, and the sentence was upheld. Hello again. True crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sandra Chesky. On November 17, 1973, in Gitchi Manitou, a small nature reserve in Iowa. On that day, 5 teenagers from South Dakota embarked on a trip there, planning to enjoy their Saturday together, unaware that only one of them would return alive. Sandra Chesky, born in 1960, was the youngest of 5 children. Her parents lost a son shortly after birth due to health problems. Her parents faced serious financial difficulties, which led to conflict. Eventually, the father left, leaving the mother to care for 3 sons and a daughter alone. She had to work hard to support her young children. While her mother completed her nursing studies, the children stayed with their grandparents. By the time Sandra was 18 months old, they had all lived together for 3.5 years. Life on the farm with her grandparents was difficult. Mainly due to their age, it was difficult for them to manage 4 grandchildren. So the children were often left to fend for themselves. However, the grandparents were very involved with their grandchildren, and the children grew up in a loving environment. After finishing school, the children were reunited with their mother. By the time Sandra started school, her mother had started a new relationship and invited her partner to live with her. This led to conflict in the family as the children struggled to accept their stepfather, creating a tense atmosphere. The mother wanted to build her own life, but her children felt like a hindrance. Finally, she made a difficult decision. One day, when Sandra returned home from school, she learned that she and her brother Bill were going to be placed in different foster homes. This news shocked Sandra, Because she had not caused any problems and had tried to maintain good relationships with everyone in the family, Sandra felt that her mother was choosing her new partner over her children, which felt like another betrayal to her. The foster family she was placed with was dysfunctional. One day, Sandra told a social worker that her foster parents were abusive. Unfortunately, she was moved to another foster family that was also cold and uncaring. She did small chores around the house and felt like a servant. Eventually, she convinced her mother to let her return home. During this time, her brother, Bill, also returned home. He had previously lived with a police officer's family, where he learned strict discipline. The two brothers tried to behave and obey their parents, fearing that they would be sent back to foster care. However, after a while, Bill lost his temper, prompting his stepfather to send both him and Sandra to a strict boarding school in South Dakota. The rules there were harsh. When they returned home for the holidays, they begged their parents not to send them back and were filled with fear. In the summer of 1973, Sandra's family moved to a large farm outside of Sioux Falls. At the time, Sandra was just 13 years old. At a party with friends, Sandra met a boy named Roger Essam. Roger was a friend of one of Sandra's acquaintances, and after they met, they began talking and communicating regularly. Eventually, Roger asked her out on a date, and their relationship developed over time. Roger, 17, and Sandra, 13, are in a relationship. But Sandra looks older than her actual age, which is why Roger doesn't suspect her of being too young. However, Sandra is afraid of losing him and keeps her real age a secret. One day, while hanging out with Roger, Sandra meets his friend Stuart. Later, they also have another friend, Michael. The group, all of them come from respectable families and have no history of trouble with the law. Planning for the camping trip began when Roger and Michael met at school on November 16, 1973. They came up with the idea of visiting the Gitchi Manitou State Reservation in Lyon County, Iowa, where they could camp, have a campfire, and share stories. Since Stuart, the oldest of the group, had a driver's license and was allowed to drive his parents' car, they quickly agreed to go. By evening, the group knew about the plan and were looking forward to their weekend adventure. On November 17, 1973, Stuart said goodbye to her parents and set off with her younger sister Dana to meet up with the rest of their group. Meanwhile, Roger invited Sandra to join them on the trip, which she agreed to. Her brother Bill had originally planned to come along, but he canceled at the last minute. The group of 5 teenagers arrived at the park around 9 p.m. Although they were running a bit behind schedule due to the time spent gathering supplies for their hike, the conservation area was home to vast forests inhabited by deer, as well as a large river that offered numerous convenient camping spots. After exploring the area, they selected a suitable location to set up camp. As night began to fall, the teenagers lit a fire, sat around it, and sang songs together. Sandra sat next to her boyfriend, hugging him. The group was having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to the deadly dangers that the night could bring. On November 18, 1973, a young couple visited the reserve, intending to take a relaxing walk and enjoy the scenery. However, during their walk, they stumbled upon something suspicious in the distance. As the man approached, he saw 2 lifeless bodies lying in the tall grass. He immediately reported the discovery to a park ranger and the police. About an hour later, police arrived, and after investigating, they discovered the bodies of 2 teenagers who had been killed by gunfire. The victims had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to their bodies, including their backs, heads, and chests. Police determined that the victims were killed at close range, giving them little chance of survival. The severity and proximity of the wounds led police to conclude that the attack was brutal and intentional. A fire was discovered at a nearby campsite, likely started by a group of teenagers. However, upon further investigation, 2 more bodies were found, both victims killed by gunshots. Police quickly called in forensic experts to examine the crime scene and collect evidence. The bodies were sent to the lab for autopsies, where the victims were quickly identified. All of the victims were from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and included 15-year-old Michael Hadrath, 17-year-old Roger Essam, 18-year-old Stuart Bod, and 14-year-old Dana Bade. Stuart's sister. The news of this tragic event has left the relatives and friends of the victims in a state of shock. They were known for their calm and kind nature, focused on sports, and stayed away from any criminal activity or negative lifestyle. It seemed like they were just gathering to relax. But, unfortunately, their evening turned tragic due to the evil intentions of others. The relatives and friends of the victims cannot understand who could have committed such a heinous act or why, as the victims had no enemies or anyone who would wish them harm. Stuart's parents told police that the teens had gone to the campsite in a blue van, but the van was not found at the scene. The van's disappearance was a key clue. Forensic experts believed it could be a crucial lead in solving the case. During the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that the victims were killed with various caliber weapons, including 12, 16, and 20 caliber bullets. This led police to suspect that at least 3 people may have been involved in the massacre. The investigation had difficulty gathering valuable information about the perpetrators. The lack of evidence, including the murder weapon, the victim's car, and witness statements, hampered the case's progress. It is important to note that in the 1970s, the police did not have modern methods and technology. This may have contributed to the case's delay. However, when a police officer from the Sioux Falls station contacted the police handling the case, the police reported that a 13-year-old girl, Sandra Chesky, came to the station and shared a shocking story. According to Sandra, after arriving at the reserve, her group of friends began setting up camp. As soon as they finished, a group of people emerged from the woods. They proceeded to attack Sandra's friends with guns. Sandra chose not to resist and was taken away from the campsite by the group. Sandra was then taken out of town, where she was raped, but was eventually released. She then tried to find her friends, but was unable to find them. The next morning, Sandra tried to contact her boyfriend, Roger, but her calls went unanswered. This left Sandra worried and panicked. It was not until she arrived at the police station that she received the heartbreaking news. Police have taken Sandra's statement. They want to find out what happened on the night of the massacre, specifically what she witnessed and who was involved. Police are trying to understand the motive behind the murder of the 4 young men and why the killers spared Sandra's life. Sandra explained that she and her friends had planned to camp at the reserve the day before. However, the group was delayed, and when they arrived, a series of events took place that led to this tragic incident. The group arrived at the reserve at around 22:30, armed with a guitar and a small musical instrument set. They planned to stay there for the night and then return home. According to the Sandra, they set up camp, lit a fire, and rested around it. The teenagers planned to smoke marijuana and then go to sleep. However, their relaxation did not last long. An hour later, they began to hear footsteps. The fire limited their vision, making it difficult for them to see what was going on around them. Then they heard a stranger yell. Roger said he was going to check. As he stood up and walked away from the campfire, a loud gunshot rang out. Roger collapsed to the ground. The group of young men immediately panicked. A second shot rang out, causing Stuart to fall to the ground next to his friend. Then came several more shots. Sandra then witnessed 3 men appear, all armed with handguns. The rest of Sandra's group quickly took cover behind trees and bushes. However, they were soon apprehended by the men. Strangers who claimed to be police officers working to combat organized crime and illegal substances. The men implied that they had seen the teenagers smoking marijuana, although they claimed to be law enforcement officers. They were not wearing police uniforms and did not display badges or identification. Sandra was very scared and complied with the criminals' demands. She did not dare to resist because she was afraid of the consequences of disobeying. On the contrary, Michael did not comply with the criminals' demands, so the men pointed their pistols at him. Michael instinctively raised his hands, but the attackers fired, seriously injuring Michael. Meanwhile, Roger and Stuart were still lying on the ground. The attackers then asked Sandra about a blue truck. Then the attackers led Michael, Donna, and Sandra toward the parking lot. After arriving at Stuart's blue van, an attacker asked Sandra to unlock the car, which she did. The attacker then got into the driver's seat and they drove away together. During the ride, the attacker talked to Sandra and assured her that her friends would be okay because the guns used were not real guns, but special tranquilizer guns that put them to sleep. Sandra found this explanation believable, thinking that her friends were simply unconscious and that they would all be reunited after everything was over. The attacker took Sandra to an abandoned house. His accomplice's car followed behind. The attacker told Sandra to stay in the car, and he got out to discuss something with the other men. One of the men then approached the car, opened the passenger door, and roughly grabbed her by the neck, pulling her out of the car. She was then brutally attacked. The attacker then got into the car and asked for Sandra's home address before dropping her off. The incident ended around 4:00 a.m. before releasing Sandra from the car. He threatened to harm her family if she told anyone about the incident, however. Sandra went to the police station to report the incident. The police were confused as to why the perpetrator released Sandra, even driving her home. Despite knowing that she could expose them to the police, Sandra was the only person who could help find the three killers. So she worked closely with the police. They brought in an artist to create composite sketches of the suspects based on Sandra's descriptions. However, the criminals did not mention their real names to Sandra. The attacks happened at night, making it difficult for Sandra to see their faces. Therefore, the composite sketches may not be completely reliable. The only detail Sandra could provide with certainty was a description of the perpetrator's vehicle, which was a Chevy pickup from the early 1970s. After meeting Sandra, Stuart's car was discovered near a truck stop in Sioux Falls the following day. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination and search of the car, looking for any fingerprints or other evidence that the perpetrator may have left behind. Unfortunately, the search did not yield any valuable information to aid the investigation. Police are investigating the location of the house where the criminal took Sandra. Hoping to find clues, data shows that this abandoned building is within 70 kilometers of the city. Search teams have been mobilized to locate the house as Thanksgiving approaches. Public pressure increases, and search teams are forced to speed up the search. The presence of 3 armed criminals capable of violent crimes against children makes people feel unsafe in their own homes. Sandra also joined in the search of the abandoned house. She also made regular visits to the police station to identify potential suspects based on composite sketches. Despite all their efforts, the case still hasn't yielded any leads. Sandra was placed under police guard at her home on Thanksgiving Day for her own safety, as she was the only witness who could identify the perpetrators. The police were concerned that the perpetrators might target Sandra after discovering that she had spoken to the police about them. On November 29, 1973, Sandra and the police discovered the White House with broken windows. It was the house where she had been brutally raped by a stranger. Sandra suddenly ran up to one of the police officers and threw her arms around him, terrified as the horrific memories of that night came flooding back to her. As she stepped back, She noticed a blue pickup truck on the road. Sandra pointed to the vehicle. Recognizing it as the one used by the criminals on the night of the massacre, the police quickly stopped the pickup truck and a man got out. He was identified as 29-year-old Alan Fryer. Sandra was horrified when she realized that this was the man who had been present at the attack. Alan was immediately arrested and taken to the police station. Alan initially denied ever having been to the sanctuary and had nothing to do with the deaths of the children in the case, claiming that he could never hurt children. However, when pressed by the police, Alan began to break down. He eventually admitted that he and 20-year-old David Fryer and 21-year-old James Fryer had indeed been to the sanctuary on the evening of the incident. Although he claimed not to have participated in the murders, he admitted that David and James had killed the children. Alan disputed Sandra's initial testimony, instead saying that the teenagers had attacked them, causing them to attack back in self-defense. Alan's story seems too unbelievable. Alan, David, and James were 3 brothers from a family of 7 sons and 6 daughters. They all lived on a farm where they developed a passion for animals, hunting, and farming. Their father, a strict disciplinarian, made his children work long hours on the farm from a young age. Disobedience to him would result in harsh punishments, earning him a reputation as a fearsome figure. The daughters of the family were known to be calm and quiet, while the sons were notorious troublemakers. Alan, the eldest, had a charm that allowed him to make many friends, but friends said he was dishonest, often exaggerating and telling false stories from a young age. Alan showed disturbing personality traits, while David, the second oldest, was apparently docile and quiet, often yielding to his older brother Alan. However, his younger brother James had a tendency towards criminal behavior from an early age. James's troubled path began at the age of 9. The 3 brothers were extremely close and protective of each other, never allowing one another to be harmed. As they grew older, their involvement in criminal activities intensified, with Alan often taking the lead and encouraging his brothers to participate in illicit deeds within the city. David and James were always by Alan's side, willingly engaging in these unlawful acts. This pattern of behavior ultimately led to David's arrest in 1967, at the age of 16, for recklessly driving through the city and firing a gun at random targets. The news did not come as a shock to the city's residents, as the 3 brothers were known to carry weapons and had a history of theft and robbery. Witnesses said they often ventured into the woods to hunt illegally when they were not committing other crimes. The 3 brothers often got into trouble, but they showed no remorse for their actions. 6 years after the shooting in the city, a tragic event occurred in the reserve. After a conversation with Alan, the police attempted to arrest David and James. David was later found at his residence, while James was in custody for robbery at the time. Notably, James had been released from prison shortly before the massacre. Sandra came to identify the suspects after they were arrested. Despite their denials, she was able to identify each of the men who had killed her friend. The police continued to question them to piece together the events of that night. It was discovered that James had been released from prison on November 18, and that all 3 had decided to go hunting. Each had their own guns, 12, 16, and 20 caliber. While hunting, they accidentally discovered a fire in the forest and saw some teenagers smoking marijuana. The 3 brothers decided to take the drugs from the teenagers and headed to their camp. Roger was the first to discover them and stood up to confront them. He was instantly killed with a shotgun minutes after the massacre. Sandra and Alan got into a pickup truck and drove away. Stuart, badly injured, tried to stand up, then fell and died from his injuries. Dana and Michael were also killed. All 3 brothers were then arrested and waited behind bars for the trial to begin. Sandra expected James to be charged with rape, among other crimes. However, The judges decided that a murder charge would be enough to punish the offenders. Effectively ignoring Sandra's traumatic experiences during the trial, David Fryer confessed to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison. Without parole, Alan Fryer was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 4 terms of life in prison without parole on June 20, 1974. Alan was initially held in the Leon County Jail before being transferred to a maximum security prison. Coincidentally, Alan and James were both held at the facility. The brothers secretly communicated and soon hatched an escape plan. One night, Alan and James escaped from the prison in the early morning. Their escape went undetected for several hours, until one of the police discovered their empty cells. News of the brothers' escape spread quickly, causing a nationwide sensation and prompting a massive manhunt. Sandra, the prosecution's main witness, was particularly concerned about her safety. After learning about the escape, she believed that the brothers would retaliate against her, so the police provided her with armed guards. She lived in fear for days until the fugitives were finally apprehended in Gitchi, Wyoming. James's trial took place in December 1974. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Sandra spent a long time healing from the trauma she had experienced, including the brutal rape and brutal murder of her friends. Unfortunately, she faced further suffering due to the public backlash. With many blaming her for the incident, her classmates shunned and bullied her, making her teenage years even more difficult, especially since she had already had a troubled and unsupportive childhood. As Sandra grew older, she persevered and rebuilt her life. At age 26, she got married, had children, and eventually became a grandmother. Years later, in 2016, she decided to share her story by writing a book. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Ashley Scott. Ashley, born on November 4, 1978, in Bossier City, Louisiana, is a kind-hearted individual. Her parents divorced while she was still in her mother's womb. However, her mother, Donna, later married Jimmy, who adopted she and loved her greatly. Jimmy had a biological daughter named Kia from a previous relationship. Unfortunately, Jimmy and Donna's marriage ended in divorce a few years later, primarily because Donna chose to leave. Ashley decided to stay with her father, Donna, but she continued to maintain a relationship with her mother. Even though Ashley's parents are divorced, she enjoyed a happy childhood. She was known for her kindness and obedience, and those around her recognized her beauty and potential. In 1996, she graduated from high school and went on to attend UAA Baptist University in Arkansas. There, she met her first love, Jeffrey Scott, who had also enrolled at the same university. Jeffrey was captivated by her beauty and warm smile, and soon they began dating. They are a beautiful couple, often holding hands and enjoying time together. Ashley's friends admired her and believed she had found a wonderful partner, as she often shared stories about how sweet and kind Jeffrey was and how fortunate she felt to be with him. In 2000, Ashley received the college degree she had always dreamed of. She pursued her dream of becoming a teacher and dedicated her life to education. However, her wedding to Jeffrey on June 9, 2001, was marred by some hidden problems. Although it appeared to be a joyous occasion on the surface, but some disturbing aspects of Jeffrey were apparent to everyone, and Ashley knew about them but chose to ignore them. A year prior to the wedding, Ashley had written to her sister, stating that she could no longer maintain communication with the family and requested they respect her choice. As a result, her family was not invited to the wedding. Ashley's friends were surprised to see that most of the guests were from Jeffrey's family, even though Ashley's family is very close and large. Initially puzzled, they later understood the situation. Her family disapproved of Jeffrey, and he made no effort to win them over. Underneath his friendly exterior, he often speaks ill of her family and acts inappropriately. Jeffrey offended those close to Ashley and believed he had every right to do so. What was most surprising was Ashley's reaction. It seemed like she was making excuses for his behavior. At the wedding, Jeffrey insulted some of her friends again and acted arrogantly. After they moved to Cordova, a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, Ashley's relationships with many people began to deteriorate. The darker side of Jeffrey started to show. After the move, he began working as a computer systems technician at his father's company, while Ashley became an English teacher at a middle school. Everyone praised her. She was seen as beautiful, cheerful, intelligent, and sociable. She loved her job and her students. Paul Dealey, a colleague, later described her as an experienced teacher. He mentioned in court that she was the main reason he looked forward to going to English class each day. He admits that school was the only place she felt safe and loved. It was where she could escape from Jeffrey. As time went on, the relationship between Ashley and Jeffrey worsened, and her connection with her family nearly fell apart. She refused to discuss it, claiming it was her personal choice. These were certainly influenced by her husband Jeffrey, who was a master manipulator. In the early years of their marriage, he completely controlled her and isolated her. His constant criticism, even on trivial matters, hurt her self-esteem. He tried to control she in every way possible. During this time, she only communicated with a few people, including her childhood friend, Lori. They had been friends since 5th grade and remained in touch into adulthood. In September 2006, Ashley attended a school reunion that she was excited about. While the others at the event didn't notice anything unusual about her, Lori was worried throughout the evening. Jeffrey kept calling Ashley, making it impossible for her to relax and enjoy the class reunion. He questioned her about who she was talking to, what she was wearing, what she was eating and drinking, and what conversations she was having. Essentially, he tried to control every aspect of her life. That night, Ashley confided in Lori about the nightmare she was experiencing and expressed that she couldn't continue living like this. She revealed that she was thinking about divorce and had even reached out to an attorney. Ashley also admitted that she knew about Jeffrey's affairs, including an affair with a colleague named Blair Brown, someone she used to be very close to. Over time, she had forgiven Blair, who had contacted her to reveal Jeffrey's true nature and how dangerous he could be. This class reunion became the last social event Ashley attended. After that, she was isolated for several weeks, and new bruises began to appear on her body. On November 23, 2006, at 3:46 p.m., a call was made to emergency services in Memphis, Tennessee. When 911 dispatcher answered, they were surprised by the calmness of the caller, Jeffrey Scott. He reported that his wife had passed out at 11:00 a.m., but a voice in the background said she might be dead. The dispatcher asked for clarification, and he stated that his wife had been breathing moments before, but now appeared to be dead. What was remarkable about the call was that Jeffrey did not appear distressed, his voice remaining calm throughout the conversation. Recognizing the possibility of a crime, the dispatcher immediately alerted the leadership, and police were dispatched to the scene. Within minutes of receiving a call, police arrived at the given address. Upon arrival, they were greeted by their host, Jeffrey. He then showed them to his wife's bedroom, Ashley. Inside, they found a man, Robert McGee, a friend of Jeffrey's, was performing CPR on Ashley. Dr. Robert informed the police that she was still alive, but her health condition was critical, with her pulse and blood pressure being very low. Upon closer inspection, medical responders found evidence of severe trauma. Ashley had suffered a head injury, likely caused by a blunt object. Her condition was dire. Her pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light. She also had bleeding from her mouth and nose, and many bruises. Scratches appeared all over her body, especially on her legs, chest, and back. The medical team attempted emergency resuscitation. They inserted a breathing tube, used a defibrillator, and administered medication to stimulate her heart. Unfortunately, all of these methods failed. Jeffrey was in critical condition and close to death. She was eventually taken to the hospital, and a neurosurgeon was called in to assess her condition. The neurosurgeon's assessment confirmed the medical team's initial diagnosis. Ashley's brain was no longer functioning due to severe damage. Doctors therefore decided to stop treatment to end her pain and disconnected her life support. She passed away shortly after. There was no doubt that Ashley had been brutally murdered. Her right ear was green, a sign often seen in people who were repeatedly hit in the same spot. A man's shoe print on her back suggested that someone had stamped or even jumped on her. Furthermore, her body showed multiple bruises at different stages of healing, indicating that she had suffered repeated abuse. Meanwhile, police were questioning two individuals, Dr. Robert and Jeffrey. Robert cooperated with the investigation, sharing what information he knew about the incident. He revealed that he had received a call from his friend Jeffrey at 2:30 p.m. He and Jeffrey had been friends since college and kept in touch occasionally. Jeffrey explained to he that Jeffrey and his wife had been drinking the night before, and afterward, she hadn't been feeling well. When she didn't wake up the next day, Jeffrey sought his help, although busy at the time, but he went to their house where he found Jeffrey next to Ashley, who showed no signs of life. Robert suspected that Jeffrey and Ashley had an argument and that something unfortunate had happened, which they wanted to keep quiet. That was why they contacted him. He was aware that they was facing difficulties and each reacted differently. Ashley had turned to alcohol as a means of relieving stress, while Jeffrey became angry and often lost control, hitting Ashley. When Robert examined Ashley, he realized that the situation was much more serious than he had initially thought. Unfortunately, Ashley had little chance of survival and required urgent medical attention immediately. So, he urged Jeffrey to call 911. Meanwhile, Robert analyzed the situation and thought that something much more serious had happened. He suspected that a crime had been planned. When speaking to the police, he admitted that he had deliberately kept Jeffrey at the scene to prevent him from escaping. Jeffrey remained completely emotionless throughout the entire ordeal. He appeared unconcerned about the fate of Ashley, the woman he once loved. When questioned by the police about what had happened, he explained that the previous night had ended in an argument. The reason for the fight was his discovery of the messages exchanged between his wife, Ashley, and another man, which led him to believe she was having an affair. Feeling betrayed, he admitted that he had beaten his wife once. Following the altercation, Ashley stumbled and fell due to her intoxication. According to Jeffrey, she faced severe alcoholism and often acted irrationally. He lost patience with her frequent tantrums. In a fit of anger, he asked her to leave the house. It was not uncommon for Ashley to sleep in the garage on such nights. The next morning, he found her still asleep in the garage and, feeling a pang of sympathy, carried her back into the house and laid her down on their bed. However, as the day went on, Ashley still hadn't woken up. Jeffrey realized something was wrong and attempted to revive her himself. He then called a friend named Robert, who was a doctor, to come to the house. However, the police did not believe his account. When they arrived, Ashley was covered in bruises from head to toe and had severe injuries to her face and head. Even if she had been drunk and fallen, she wouldn't have sustained such extensive injuries. It was evident that she had been assaulted. Jeffrey was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, and once the autopsy results were released, the charge was elevated to first-degree murder. The pathologist's report revealed that Ashley died from a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain. Such injuries occur from a significant blow to the head, causing the brain to collide with the skull, which leads to severe bleeding and swelling that cuts off the oxygen supply. This process causes parts of the body to weaken, causing extreme pain. Tragically, she could have survived if help had arrived within the first few hours. Additionally, over 50 hematomas of varying colors and densities were found on her body, confirming that she had been repeatedly attacked. It's difficult to fathom the pain she experienced. The saddest thing is that the person who caused this pain was her husband, Jeffrey, the person who was supposed to protect her. After Jeffrey's arrest, detectives examined the crime scene and found signs of a struggle throughout the house. Items were scattered, furniture was turned over, and a broken vase was in the living room. On the kitchen table, near a laptop, are printed text messages between Ashley and her lover. These text messages support Jeffrey's testimony about the cause of the crime. In the garage, officers discovered bloodstains on the floor. Inside her car, they found women's clothing and personal items, including a handbag with her documents and passport. It seemed that she had been planning to escape, but did not succeed. Officers then interviewed family members and friends, uncovering unexpected details about their lives and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Unfortunately, Ashley is having a difficult time in her relationship with her husband, Jeffrey. From the very beginning, they believed that their relationship would turn out well. However, he quickly became abusive, making her life extremely miserable. Lori's testimony became very important to the investigation. Detectives were interested in what Ashley's family and friends had to say. Through their conversations, they gathered a lot of useful information. Lori also shared that just before Ashley's death, Jeffrey had called her multiple times to complain about his wife. He claimed that Ashley drank heavily, lost her balance, and frequently fell, which explained the bruises on her body. However, the next morning, Ashley would not remember these incidents and would blame Jeffrey instead. He believed that Ashley's increasing alcohol dependency was due to their mutual friend Blair, whom he accused of corrupting Ashley and turning her against him. Jeffrey also expressed that he no longer wanted children because he felt disgusted by Ashley after everything that had happened. He accused his wife of being unfaithful, lying, and struggling with alcoholism. However, Lori did not believe him and thought he was trying to excuse his own behavior. Eventually, Lori realized that Ashley was a victim of domestic violence and was in serious danger. After each of Jeffrey's calls, Lori would try to reach Ashley, but she never answered, which was unusual. The last time they met was shortly before the tragic incident. They went shopping together, but Ashley did not buy anything for herself and seemed sad and lost in thought. Lori attempted to discuss Ashley's marriage, but Ashley preferred not to ruin their time together and changed the subject. She just said she was ready for a divorce, but it made her very nervous. She knew Jeffrey very well and worried that she couldn't predict how he would react. The next testimony concerns Blair Brown, who is often mentioned when talking about Ashley's family. During her questioning, she admitted that she had been in a romantic relationship with Jeffrey in the past, which gave her insight into his uncontrollable fits of rage. It was noted that Blair and Ashley had rekindled their friendship about 6 months before the crime occurred. Blair felt sympathy for Ashley and offered her occasional support. She acknowledged that her relationship with Jeffrey was a mistake and apologized repeatedly for it. She and Ashley sometimes meet for drinks. Ashley often goes to her house to hide from Jeffrey. On one occasion, he found Ashley at her place and violently attacked Ashley's, hitting several times in the face and throwing Ashley's onto the street, showing no concern for she as a witness. Even though there have been such incidents, Ashley still justifies Jeffrey's actions. The trial of Jeffrey Scott started on January 13, 2009. The prosecution claimed that the crime was premeditated. Evidence showed that an argument between Jeffrey and his wife Ashley began in the living room, where a broken vase was discovered. The conflict becomes more serious as they move throughout the house, and Ashley endures violence in nearly every room. Bloodstains were found throughout the home. Ashley's divorce attorney testified for the prosecution, stating that she had met with Ashley the day before death. At that time, all the divorce paperwork was ready. Ashley only needed to pack her belongings and leave while Jeffrey was at work. The attorney advised Ashley to leave secretly, which explains the items and documents found in her car. However, Ashley chose not to follow this advice because she wanted to explain her decision to her husband, a choice that ultimately proved fatal. The attorney did everything she could to assist Ashley, even offering her services for a minimal fee. She said that Ashley had been drinking and quitting work to deal with her emotions related to her marriage. This shows that Ashley needs long-term support. To ensure Ashley's safety, they communicated in secret, as Jeffrey controlled all phone calls. They met in public places or used payphones for their conversations. Witnesses reported seeing scratches and bruises on Ashley, which she tried to hide with makeup. Some people knew the source of her injuries, but felt powerless to intervene. In their final report, medical examiners noted that Ashley had been frequently kicked. It appeared that Jeffrey had pushed her to the ground and stomped on her, leaving old bruises on her back and legs. The defense team for Jeffrey worked hard to have the charge reduced to a second-degree crime. The attorney tried to make Ashley look bad, portraying her as an alcoholic and emotionally unstable. Their strategy was to convince the jury that Jeffrey also had a difficult time in the marriage. They discredited she, who couldn't defend herself because she was deceased. It came to light that in 2005, Ashley had received a drunk driving fine. Meanwhile, Jeffrey said he wanted to save their marriage. He bought a new house and was ready to have children, while Ashley had and send intimate pictures to your lover. Regarding the crime, Jeffrey said that he lost control, realized that all his efforts were in vain, and that Ashley had found someone else. He expressed his regret to his wife's family, saying that he regretted the pain he caused them. He mourned her loss and prayed for her soul. However, during the trial, it was mentioned that after his arrest, he did not inquire about his wife's well-being. Instead, he simply wanted to know the outcome of a recent football game. His attorney have adopted controversial tactics, even arguing that Ashley's injuries were largely caused by seizures brought on by alcohol withdrawal. To support this claim, an independent expert was brought in. In response, the assistant county medical examiner was called to testify. He reviewed evidence from the autopsy, describing Ashley's injuries in detail and stressing that her cause of death could not have been a fall. The prosecutor said that the defense's claim that the crime was committed accidentally was unreasonable. It was evident that Ashley wanted to escape from Jeffrey, her abuser, but out of love for her husband, wished to end things peacefully. Meanwhile, Jeffrey attacked her and hitting her repeatedly. He understood that he was causing great suffering to his wife. He ultimately finished the attack in the garage, where she lost consciousness. He saw how badly she was hurt, but chose to ignore it and failed to call for medical help right away. The prosecutor maintained that he intended to kill his wife. However, a new clue suddenly appears. Investigators discover that Ashley actually wants to save her marriage. Evidence showed she was taking medication to become pregnant and had supported buying a new home. She might have felt so trapped in the toxic relationship that she couldn't envision life without Jeffrey. Nevertheless, she eventually made the choice to leave. It's possible she hoped to leave without causing a rift, waiting for her husband to promise he would change and that everything would be okay. Victims of abuse often hold on to such unrealistic hopes. On January 19, 2009, Jeffrey Scott was found guilty of a second-degree crime. Even the judge disagreed with the jury's verdict. He criticized the jury for having voted 12 yes and 1 no on the original charge. One juror did not believe Jeffrey was guilty. Under state law, a unanimous verdict is necessary for a first-degree conviction. Ashley's family was also devastated. Jeffrey will serve 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Many feel this punishment is insufficient for someone who tortured a woman for years, isolating her from others, brainwashing her, and making her believe that she and her family were unworthy of being in his life. Ashley's father remarked that it was the worst thing that had ever happened to him, expressing his love for his daughter and stating that if she had died of natural causes, he could have eventually accepted it. However, he expressed his pain when he realized that his daughter had died a cruel death caused by Jeffrey and that he would never accept it. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathy Lamb. Kathy Lamb lived in an affluent area of Palm Beach. Kathy had a challenging childhood. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she lived with her father. During her teenage years, her mother was absent, which took a significant emotional toll on her. She was self-conscious about her weight, feeling larger than her peers. Fortunately, her stepmother was kind and supportive. Recognizing Kathy's insecurities, she helped her build her confidence, and over time, Kathy became more confident. She started playing sports and trying to lose weight. Kathy was very smart and kind, which helped her make friends in high school. She was active and cheerful, and her problems seemed to disappear when she was with her friends. One of those friends was Jeff. They met when he was 17 and she was 16, and they quickly felt a special connection. Their relationship continued even after they graduated. 2 years later, they secretly married, surprising their families. When their parents found out, they thought the couple was too young to make such a serious decision, but the couple was determined to stay together, despite family pressure. It seemed like the newlyweds had a bright future ahead of them. Jeff worked hard at a local repossessed car park, while Kathy found work as a pharmacist at a pharmacy. She had the necessary education and wanted to advance in the field. Over the years, Jeff remained a tow truck driver, while Kathy became a top pharmacist. A year later, she was offered a job as a district planner for distributing drugs to pharmacies, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. They achieved their dream of owning a home and enjoyed 12 happy years there until a devastating tragedy occurred. On June 15, 2004, Jeff returned home from work at around 7 p.m. He intended to invite his wife to dinner. However, as soon as he entered, he was horrified to see blood all over the hallway, running down the walls. The gruesome evidence of blood splatter and brain matter terrified him. As he called 911, he struggled to speak and held back tears. Initially, the operator mistook his cries for those of a woman, but Jeff eventually plucked up the courage to describe his home, which now looked like the set of a horror movie. At the end of the corridor, there was a significant amount of blood on one wall, as if it had been splattered. Facing this wall, about 1.5 meters away, similar splatters were visible on the opposite wall, and they extended down the stairs leading to the second floor. On the upper level, in the midst of the gruesome scene, lay 30-year-old Kathy, who was unresponsive. The operator attempted to guide Jeff over the phone to provide first aid, but Kathy's injuries were so severe that there was nothing that could be done. When the police arrived, they were taken aback by the horrific sight. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. Kathy's body showed multiple severe head injuries from heavy objects. Her skull and face were so badly damaged that they appeared completely disfigured. Although the murder weapon was not found at the scene, a thorough laboratory analysis determined that it was likely a long, heavy object with a hexagonal shape or similar features. Jeff mentioned that he had tried to call his wife several times after 5 p.m. but received no answer, which he found unusual. Concerned, he rushed home to meet her. It turned out that not only Kathy was injured, the couple had 3 large dogs in the house, Jeff's dog and his wife's 2 dogs. Tragically, both of his wife's pets were discovered badly beaten and lying on the floor next to their deceased owner. They had suffered severe head injuries and were barely alive. Unfortunately, the injuries were so extensive that the veterinarians had to euthanize the dogs to relieve their suffering. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff's dog was found locked in his owner's bedroom. Paws from all 3 dogs were found at the scene, along with blood that police believe did not come from the animals. They suspect the blood may have come from a struggle with the killer. The blood has been sent for analysis to determine its source and whether it can help the investigation, and they await the results. Police are uncertain whether the blood on the dogs came from Kathy or whether they fought with the attacker to protect her, resulting in their fatal injuries. Police found the dogs unharmed after the woman had been killed and the fight had begun. The amount of blood on the animals suggests that they had seriously injured the attacker, possibly lacerating an arm or leg. This means that the attacker would have bled profusely, possibly from an open wound, and that he would have sought medical attention at a hospital. The attacker's intentions remain unclear. He may have acted recklessly or out of a deep hatred for his victim, ignoring the large dogs that lived with the family. After examining the crime scene, the police still lacked any concrete leads. They had to wait for the autopsy results to gather more information. In the meantime, they checked all the local hospitals for the injured attacker. Several suspicious people came in with injuries that were found to be unrelated to the incident, as their injuries did not match those of a dog bite. The police began talking to local residents in the hope that someone had seen suspicious activity at Kathy's home or had noticed the criminal fleeing, possibly injured. Unfortunately, no one observed anything unusual. They were also trying to find a motive. Robbery seemed unlikely given the many valuables in the family's home. Only the gold earrings with diamonds that the Kathy was wearing during the attack were missing, while everything else remained untouched. Even the money, which was clearly visible, was not taken. It seems unlikely that a robber would ignore such an opportunity. There were no indications of a break-in, the furniture was undisturbed, drawers were not opened, and belongings were not scattered about, as thieves typically do when they search for valuables. This led the police to explore alternative motives and various theories. The forensic expert determined that the murder occurred between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Jeff, the first suspect who found the scene, had a strong alibi. At that time, he was on the job and was seen by numerous co-workers. Additionally, he showed no signs of injuries that would typically result from a struggle with the dogs. Just as police were about to clear Jeff of suspicion, an unknown young woman arrived at the family home. Joy Steele came to the house and introduced herself as Jeff's fiancée, which surprised the police, especially since Jeff had been crying earlier. The police found this an interesting case, as a man who had just lost his wife was being comforted by his mistress, with whom he had been in a serious relationship for a long time. This revelation made the case seem even more suspicious. 7 years into their relationship, Kathy discovered Jeff's infidelity. Despite this, they remained together and did not divorce. Kathy forgave him and even encouraged him to end the affair, leading to their reconciliation and continued life together just before the tragic incident. Police are considering whether a love triangle may have been a motive for the crime. Jeff had a strong motive for killing his troubled wife. That doesn't necessarily mean Jeff killed Kathy himself. He may have convinced someone else to do it. The police discovered a third dog locked in one of the rooms, which was unharmed. This was peculiar, especially given the serious injuries of the other 2 dogs belonging to the Kathy. Did the criminal truly hate her to the extent that he chose to ruin everything she cherished? The police needed to find answers to these questions. In the meantime, one of the police was questioning Jeff's mistress, Joy Steele, at the location of the incident. Joy shared her and Jeff's future plans. They planned to move away after a while Jeff planned to quit his job. Joy had a solid alibi. Joy, who was apparently working at a restaurant during the time of the murder, was present, and multiple people could confirm this. In addition, Joy had no injuries on her body. Although the suspicious couple could not have been directly involved in the murder due to their alibis and their lack of injuries, the police have not ruled them out as suspects given the serious circumstances surrounding the crime. They had a strong motive for their plan. The investigation into the crime and the hiring of the killer continues, with the police focusing on identifying potential enemies or those who may have wanted to harm Kathy. However, Kathy's friends and relatives have been unable to identify any enemies, with the exception of her husband. That same day, another suspect emerged. Jeff had another mistress named Lisa. A few weeks before the murder, Lisa's husband, Ray, discovered them together when he came home early from work and found Jeff shirtless on the couch. This confrontation led Ray to kick Jeff out of the house. The next day, Ray calls Lisa and threatens to kill Jeff if he continues with Lisa. Ray emerged as a potential suspect due to his violent nature and apparent motive. However, the situation raised questions about the Kathy. Why did Ray kill Jeff's wife? She had not harmed him and was actually the victim in the scenario, just like Ray. Despite this, Jeff continued to blame Ray. He believed that Ray had gone to the house to carry out his threat against Jeff, but Jeff was not home at the time. It is also possible that upon arriving at Jeff's house, Ray was in danger from Jeff's wife and dogs, so Ray felt compelled to kill her and the dogs. However, this motive does not fit with the extreme violence the killers showed towards Kathy. Her injuries were extremely brutal, suggesting that this was not a random crime, but an act of deep hatred. The police then turned their attention to Lisa, the second lover. Despite her husband's threats, she remained in contact with Jeff. Cell phone records confirmed that they frequently called and texted each other, including at the time of the Kathy's murder. Lisa and her husband Ray were both investigated, but they had solid alibis and were eliminated as suspects. However, the police decided to track the geolocation data of the lovers' mobile devices to gain more details. The call between Lisa and Jeff took place just minutes after the murder. Jeff's cell phone was found near his home, and Jeff was not at work at the time, contrary to what he had previously said. Additionally, Jeff's dog was unharmed, which seems more than just a coincidence. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the animals. They collected DNA samples from the dog's muzzle and paws. Notably, the stains found on Jeff's dog were identified as palm prints. Blood samples taken from the scene were confirmed to belong to the Kathy, indicating that the perpetrator was in the hall with the dog after the attack on Kathy, during which she was injured or possibly killed. Police suspected that the killer's DNA might be on the animal's muzzles and paws. However, the investigation disproved this theory, revealing that the blood was not human, but believed to be from dogs that may have been fighting each other. By analyzing all the new information, police were able to piece together a clearer picture of the events that occurred on that tragic day. Someone entered the house and discovered Kathy along with her 3 large dogs. The attacker hit the woman in the head with a heavy object. 2 dogs were present, also seriously injured and later died. And they did not attack the attacker. They endured the blows without defending themselves. The 3rd dog also did not confront the attacker. Instead, the 3rd dog focused on protecting the other 2 dogs. This behavior aroused suspicion. The police consulted dog handlers for insights. Experts suggested that the dog's lack of resistance indicated they were familiar with the attacker and viewed him as a friend. This familiarity explained why they did not confront him but instead appeared to bite each other. Police found bite marks on the dogs, leading them to conclude that only Jeff, the owner of the surviving dog, could have attacked Kathy. Additionally, geolocation data indicated that the Jeff was near the house, which supported their suspicions. However, the Supreme Court only had circumstantial evidence, meaning they still had a long way to go before bringing any charges. The police needed one crucial piece of information to strengthen their case. With no further clues, the police focused on investigating Jeff's personal life to understand what might have motivated Jeff to kill his wife. It turned out that the family had recently faced significant financial difficulties, which had affected Jeff for many years before these events. Jeff's boss caught him stealing a large sum of money, about $30,000. Jeff had not spent it all and agreed to return it. He also paid his boss $20,000 in restitution. The police then analyzed Jeff's activities. It turned out that his job brought in only a small income, just enough for his family's needs. He also spent money on his mistress. His wife's income was much higher, but he did not want to tell her about his problems. Jeff was characterized as someone without any remarkable business skills. He was neither particularly foolish nor exceptionally intelligent. His earnings were limited, making the compensation amount a serious financial burden for him. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he struggled to come up with the funds. Jeff sought ways to earn extra money or secure a loan, but all these efforts proved fruitless, and the total amount of compensation remained far beyond his reach. He later learned that he was the sole beneficiary of Kathy's life insurance policy, which was worth $29,000. Police believed that this amount of money could solve all of Jeff's financial problems. On the day of the incident, police collected the clothes he was wearing at the time. However, forensic experts conducted a quick test and found no blood or DNA from Kathy on his clothes. The suspect was wearing dark clothing, making it difficult to detect any blood stains. The experts meticulously studied every millimeter of the items using a microscope with 60,000 times magnification. Inside the jeans, they discovered several small red drops, which the forensic team identified as blood. This blood had seeped deep into the fabric fibers, suggesting that it was from high-velocity splashes. This evidence was consistent with the nature of the injuries sustained by the Kathy. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kathy. The police were further surprised when they examined the Jeff's other belongings. They found a gold earring embedded with a diamond in one of his trouser pockets, which he had claimed was stolen during an attack. This indicated that he likely staged the scene and hesitated to dispose of the item to avoid being caught at a pawn shop. To strengthen their case in court, the police needed to find the murder weapon. Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find the weapon. It took the prosecutor's office 2 months to establish a clear connection between the killer and the victim. During this time, an employee of the company where Jeff worked discovered a hexagonal crowbar on the roof of the building. The tool was standard equipment on the company's tow trucks and was available to all employees. What made the crowbar suspicious was the significant amount of blood found on it. The employee promptly notified the police of the discovery. Jeff claimed that he had lost his crowbar and was unable to provide it to the police. This raised suspicions that the bloody crowbar belonged to him and may have been hidden as the murder weapon. The crowbar was sent to a laboratory, where experts compared it to the injuries found on Kathy's head. They concluded that the shape of the tool matched the impact marks. Additionally, the blood found on the crowbar was confirmed to be Kathy's through analysis. Jeff was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Friends knew he had often complained about his troubled marriage. He claimed that Kathy couldn't manage household chores, which made him angry. However, he overlooked that she was the one supporting the family financially and covering their travel expenses, leaving her little time for housework. Jeff's car was always cluttered with garbage, yet he continued to blame Kathy. He frequently talked to friends about wanting to end their relationship, and several acquaintances reported that he was considering divorce. Kathy was unhappy in her marriage to Jeff due to his betrayals and chaotic lifestyle, which she knew about. She often vented her frustrations to friends but couldn't bring herself to leave him because she loved him deeply. Despite her unhappiness, she stayed with Jeff, trying to tolerate his behavior. For Jeff, murder seemed like a better option than going through a divorce. He was in dire financial straits after stealing $30,000 at work, which had severely impacted his finances. If he divorced Kathy, they would have to divide their assets, and he risked losing their home. He felt he had nothing left to lose, as a divorce would leave him with little since Kathy could claim most of their assets. Jeff figured that by committing murder, he could use the life insurance payout to pay off his debts, keeping part of the money to start a new life with his mistress. Jeff had promised to make a choice between his two girlfriends, Lisa and Joy, but the decision remained a secret. During the investigation, police uncovered more details about the crime. On the day it happened, Jeff left for work but had actually planned to kill his wife. He drove a tow truck to a gas station, pretending he needed to fill it up. His absence from work was noted, and during that time, he returned home to wait for his wife to return. He was familiar with her daily routine, so he did not have to wait long. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff brutally killed his wife's dogs with a crowbar. The dogs, confused and frightened, began to fight. To stop the chaos, Jeff hit each dog on the head and then took his pet, Netarunu, into a room and locked the door. After the incident, he removed his wife's diamond earrings, intending to make it look like a robbery. He discarded some of his clothes, taking off his shirt and shoes, but he kept the jeans he wore during the massacre, likely overlooking the bloodstains on them. This oversight allowed forensic experts to find tiny drops of blood on the jeans, linking him to the crime. His lover called him while he was near his home, which revealed his location on the phone. When he arrived at the station, he attempted to dispose of the crowbar used in the attack, but did so carelessly, simply throwing it onto the roof of a utility building and not washing it. He believed the tool would never be discovered. Jeff was convicted of premeditated murder due to financial difficulties he thought he could overcome by collecting life insurance from his wife's death. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the victim. His fingerprints were found on the crowbar, along with Kathy's blood on his clothing. He had attempted to stage a robbery and failed to completely conceal the earrings that were believed to have been stolen. Several people testified about domestic problems. Kathy still hoped to reconcile with her husband, despite being devastated by his betrayal. She truly loved him and was undaunted by his financial difficulties. What she craved most was love and understanding. Unfortunately, Jeff did not want to rekindle their relationship. Instead, he planned a murder that he believed would net him $29,000. It is suspected that Joy, one of Jeff's lovers, knew of his intentions. Jeff promised her a future together, on the condition that she pay off the debt he would incur from his crimes. During the hearing, the defense attempted to portray Jeff as a model husband and a good person, but no witness could reliably substantiate this claim. Jeff had never been a hard worker and showed little interest in his work. He had no motivation to do anything else and did not have a positive reputation in his family life. He was not a good husband, as he had a history of infidelity that his late wife knew about. His lifestyle was well known to friends and family. But it was his wife who suffered the most. When Jeff's efforts to build a better image failed, his attorney changed tactics. He began looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. However, the prosecution's strategy was well rehearsed and backed by substantial evidence, leaving little room for debate. The defense argued that Jeff was not the only possible suspect in Kathy's murder, claiming that the police had focused too quickly on him without fully exploring other potential suspects. In fact, Police and the prosecutor's office had interviewed dozens of people and considered multiple suspects. Each suspect was thoroughly questioned, allowing police to eliminate those who did not fit the evidence. The prosecution argued that the attacker had two motives. First, he hoped to solve his financial problems through a life insurance policy. Second, he wanted to get rid of his troubled wife so he could live with one of his mistresses. Additionally, he sought to avoid the risk of losing his assets or having to divide his assets in a divorce. The prosecution also argued that Jeff's mistress, Lisa, knew about his plans. She supported him and was waiting for the call to hear about the progress of the crime. Her indiscretion led her to call Jeff, which provided the police with a vital clue. Investigations were conducted to determine whether the mistresses were involved in planning or organizing the crime, but the results were negative. However, it is clear that they supported the Jeff, even though they should have reported his bad intentions to the police to prevent the murder. Ultimately, no evidence was found to prove the lovers' guilt or involvement, so they faced no consequences in court. In September 2006, Jeff Lamb was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. As the verdict was read, Lisa wept uncontrollably in court. Kathy's family believes the court's ruling was fair. In Kathy's mother's opinion, Jeff should rot behind bars for the rest of his life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lacy Fletcher. Lacy Fletcher was born on November 25, 1985, and spent her childhood and much of her life in Louisiana. She was the only child of Sheila and Clay Fletcher. Her father worked for a non-profit organization focused on the American Civil War, while her mother had previously served as an assistant prosecutor and worked for the mayor. The family was well respected in their community and had strong religious beliefs, but they also harbored dark secrets. In 1995, the Lacy moved to a larger home in Slaughter, Louisiana, a small town where everyone knows one another. Lacy's early years appeared normal. She was a sweet and cheerful child. After the move, she enrolled in a Baptist school, continuing her education until high school. However, she faced challenges with concentration and connecting with her peers, which made her school experience difficult and resulted in very few friends. Despite these struggles, she remained kind and maintained a smile. After finishing 9th grade, Lacy was homeschooled due to multiple health issues. She had been facing challenges since early childhood, with doctors later diagnosing her with autism spectrum disorder and social anxiety disorder. Lacy struggled with these conditions for most of her life. Her parents believed they could find solutions to her problems, but they were unaware of the tragic fate that awaited their daughter. In the early hours of January 3, 2022, at around 2 a.m., Sheila called the rescue service, 911, to report that her daughter was not breathing. During the call, the dispatcher guided her on how to perform first aid. Sheila followed the instructions for artificial respiration, making desperate attempts to save her child. However, Sheila was in a panic and couldn't even answer the question about her daughter's age right away. She mistakenly said Lacy was 31, even though she was actually 36. When the medics and police arrived at the house, they found Lacy lifeless, lying on a leather sofa. This was just the start of a series of shocking revelations. Although the house looked decent from the outside, a terrible stench emanated from the doorway. At 3:07 a.m., police entered Lacy's room. The surroundings were in a frightening state of disarray, filled with insects and rodents. Sheila's was so wretched that it was hard to determine Lacy's age. Her parents were unsure but believed she was 31. She was eventually identified as a young woman thought to be between 24 and 48 years old. It appeared she had spent an extensive amount of time sitting on the couch, creating a shape resembling a crater. This indentation had collected dirt and waste, and she had remained nearly immobile in that spot. The room was filled with a horrendous odor, a mix of excrement and urine along with waste from the insects and rodents. Lacy's condition suggested that she had been in this place for an extended period. Her legs were curled beneath her due to the accumulation of waste, and her limbs were severely decayed, nearly to the bone. The police noted deep ulcers and signs of possible tissue infection on her body, which was very dirty. Her hair was severely tangled, indicating it hadn't been washed or combed in a long time. Additionally, her face was marked with red spots that were difficult to identify at first glance. An autopsy revealed that Lacy's stomach contained only candy and foam and residue from cleaning products. Similar foam and liquid were found on the sofa, along with evidence that Lacy may have tried to eat the cleaning products because she was hungry. Next to the sofa was a gray chest of drawers with a pile of neatly folded clothes. The room also contained a portable toilet and a black chair a few meters away from the sofa, which contained various medical supplies, talcum powder, and bottles. According to police, the girl's death was the result of neglect of her health. Police believe Lacy did not receive the proper care she needed and was unable to care for herself due to her physical or mental health issues. The medical examiner identified a number of health issues, including severe chronic ulcers, bone infections, malnutrition, and sepsis. These conditions led to Lacy's tragic and painful death. After investigation and discussion with her parents, it was discovered that Lacy had been sitting on the same couch for approximately 12 years. After her death, her mother posted on social media, "Mom and Dad love you so much." On January 18, 2022, Clay and Sheila were interviewed by police. They explained that Lacy's problems began long ago due to her health issues. Initially, Lacy refused to leave the house, then her room, eventually moving to the living room, where she found the most comfort. To accommodate her needs, her parents renovated the room, bought a large leather sofa, installed a toilet, and provided her with everything she needed to care for her. They brought her food and care, but her condition continued to deteriorate. Lacy became increasingly afraid to leave the couch, forcing her to urinate on herself or on the floor, sometimes using a towel. During the summer, her mental health continued to decline. Although her parents suggested moving to a psychiatric clinic, Lacy resisted the idea and chose to stay in her room. Lacy's parents maintained that she never complained about her health problems over the years, even as her injuries worsened. Sheila herself maintained that Lacy had not been neglected or harmed. Her mother maintained that Lacy had always been under the care of a doctor. However, when police spoke to the doctor, they discovered that Lacy had not seen a doctor since 2010. She did not report any pain or health problems, and the doctor did not visit her at home, leaving him unaware of her true condition. In fact, Lacy last visited the medical center in 2010. Although Lacy needed to be hospitalized, her parents refused, saying she did not want to go there. After that, Lacy's health rapidly declined. Her parents said that, in the fall of 2021, Lacy began to have nutritional problems and began to eat significantly less. On the evening of the incident, around 10 p.m., Sheila checked on her daughter before going to bed and found Lacy unresponsive. She had fallen to her left side with her legs crossed under her body and was no longer able to straighten her body. After the police arrived, they suspected that the parents had acted inappropriately. They believed that Sheila and Clay deliberately left their daughter on the couch, ignoring her needs and failing to seek medical help. For 12 years, she suffered and lived in her own waste until her death on January 3, 2022. In May 2022, Clay Fletcher, 65, and his wife Sheila, 64, were charged with second-degree murder. The couple was arrested but later released on bail, returning to the same house where Lacy had endured terrible suffering for more than a decade. This decision sparked significant controversy. The judge justified it by stating that the parents had no prior criminal record and posed a low flight risk. Thus, they were allowed to await trial in the community. In early 2023, the court dropped the charges, but prosecutors continued to seek a connection between Lacy's death and her parents' neglect. The prosecutor argued for second-degree murder charges, claiming they did nothing to help their daughter. Lacy's parents were her main caregivers, responsible for her well-being. On June 19, 2023, they faced new charges for the same offenses. They were arrested but quickly released on bail. This incident gained significant attention in the local community and received extensive media coverage. Journalists reached out to the parents, who shared the emotional pain they had experienced for years while witnessing their daughter's depression, feeling helpless to change her situation. Police suspect that Sheila and Clay's statements were an attempt to portray themselves as grieving parents to avoid legal consequences. Under state law, they could face second-degree murder charges, which could result in life in prison depending on the circumstances. Police believe the couple's actions contributed to Lacy's death. People started noticing that Lacy showed clear signs of autism, which was later confirmed by medical professionals. As a result, her development began to lag behind that of her peers. By the time she reached 17 or 18 years old, she occasionally invited friends over to watch children's cartoons. However, her childlike interests caused her social circle to shrink over time. Around 2007, Lacy stopped going outside altogether. During this time, one of the neighbors became concerned and asked her parents about her situation. Sheila, Lacy's mother, reassured the neighbor that everything was fine. Nevertheless, due to Lacy's condition, she was reluctant to go outside and tried to avoid strangers. After this conversation, the neighbor did not bring it up again. The situation began to deteriorate quickly around 2010 when Lacy became largely inactive and even soiled her living area. Officers reported feeling an overwhelming disgust, which they described as the worst they had ever experienced. The foul smell in the Fletcher home was so overwhelming that one officer could not eat normally for nearly a week after responding to the incident. The stench lingered in his mind. This reaction was particularly surprising because the detective had dealt with very gruesome cases in his career, including investigations into killers who sold body parts. He stated that Lacy's living conditions were far worse than anything he had ever encountered. While the Lacy claimed they had long adjusted to and lived peacefully in such an atmosphere, those who knew the family never saw any unusual behavior from their parents. For years, the couple seemed like a typical family struggling with the hardships of their sick daughter. Although some witnesses described them as somewhat reserved, no one suspected that they were deliberately letting their daughter's condition worsen. This led to questions about the girl's health in isolation, with some even suspecting underlying mental health issues. Her parents claimed that doctors had diagnosed their daughter with locked-in syndrome, a rare condition that leaves a person almost completely paralyzed except for eye movement. Patients suffering from this disorder are entirely bedridden and reliant on caregivers, yet they can still feel everything and communicate through their eyes. Strangely, there was no such diagnosis recorded in Lacy's medical files, despite her parents' claims. The girl was only diagnosed with social anxiety disorder and autism spectrum disorder. There was no evidence of locked-in syndrome, but that doesn't explain why Lacy spent years on the couch. Additionally, foam from a hygiene product was found in her stomach, suggesting she could feed herself but didn't appear to be fed. This begs the question, if Lacy's parents really wanted her dead, why did they call the emergency services? Furthermore, they didn't bother to clean the house to hide any signs of neglect. The situation seems absurd. Many neighbors did not even know they had a daughter. The mother and father had the opportunity to discreetly dispose of her body without raising any suspicion. No one looked for her, as she had no friends due to her significant developmental delay. Despite the apparent apathy surrounding the Lacy family, they chose to contact the police rather than dispose of any evidence, allowing police to investigate the room where Lacy had been suffering for years. From the start, Sheila and Clay denied any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, the police focused their investigation on proving that the parents were responsible for Lacy's suffering. But did they intentionally create an environment where Lacy was locked in her own room? The poor living conditions and the parents' calm demeanor raised suspicions. Furthermore, why would Lacy use sanitary products and lick foam off a dirty couch if she wasn't hungry? Police interpreted this as evidence that Lacy had been starved, while her parents insisted that her actions were due to mental health issues. Sheila and Clay told police that Lacy did not want to communicate or share her struggles with others. This could be seen as an attempt to avoid bothering strangers about her troubles. They claimed that Lacy had been dealing with various health issues for years, a sensitive subject that most people would rather keep private. The prosecutor's office suspected that the villains deliberately hid information and mocked Lacy without intervention. The victim had never complained about pain, likely feeling embarrassed in front of the police. Forensic experts found severe ulcers on her limbs, with flesh rotting down to the bones, which would have caused her intense, constant pain. Under such conditions, she would have been unable to endure the pain without strong medication. However, her parents claimed they never heard her complain, and the neighbors had not noticed any sounds coming from the Lacy household. The lack of noise is understood to be due to the distance between the two homes. Forensic experts have found discrepancies in the parents' accounts. They claim to have discovered their daughter's death at night and contacted the police immediately, but the medical examiner later determined that she had been dead for more than a day. Despite these discrepancies, the parents continued to refer to their daughter's disability and denied any role in the alleged abuse. Sheila told police that she frequently entered her daughter's room in the mornings to care for her by treating her wounds, feeding her, and looking after her. However, this claim was proven false since no food was found in Lacy's stomach. Sheila explained that she tried to keep the room clean but struggled because Lacy was uncommunicative. Her testimony contradicts the medical examiner's report on the time of death. This raises important questions about motive. If the parents were truly guilty, why did they call the police? Why did they subject their daughter and themselves to years of torture while living in such horrific conditions? Police believe that the mother and father might not fully grasp the seriousness of their daughter's mental health issues. The parents insisted on maintaining Lacy's common sense and cognitive abilities, despite the medical professionals' warnings that, due to her identified disorders, Lacy couldn't fully understand her circumstances. Some have suggested that Clay and Sheila may have suffered from mental disorders that made it difficult for them to understand their actions. However, they were well-respected members of the local community and had not aroused suspicion up to that point. Witnesses did not describe them as having such problems, and it was unusual for 3 family members to suffer from mental illness at the same time. Sheila's defense attorney initially succeeded in getting the charges against her dismissed. However, the charges were refiled on June 19, 2023. On February 1, 2024, the district attorney announced that Clay and Sheila would plead guilty to manslaughter. On February 5, the prosecution decided to seek the maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. A hearing was scheduled for March 20th. A key moment in the hearing was the testimony of the police who were the first to arrive at the scene. They described seeing Lacy Fletcher in a horrific scene. They described the smell as a horrifying mix of rotting flesh and human and animal waste. The parents, who should have been protecting Lacy, transformed their home into a nightmarish environment. Lacy's legs were bent under her body and remained in that position for an extended period, leading to not only decay in her flesh but also stiffness in her muscles and ligaments. Just imagine the pain and discomfort she must have endured. Naturally, she couldn't stay quiet and had to scream from her pain and suffering. Sadly, it remains unclear how they were able to silence her. The investigation revealed that shortly before her death, her parents had gone on vacation for a few days, leaving her alone. She had no food or water and was unable to move due to her health condition. The only food she had was a peppermint candy, which was found in her stomach during the autopsy, suggesting that this was not enough to satisfy her hunger. In desperation, she may have lost consciousness and ingested detergent. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was septicemia caused by decomposing flesh. For many years, Lacy endured horrific and unsanitary living conditions, accompanied only by insect larvae and mice. Witnesses described the extreme neglect and cruelty exhibited by her parents. They were so indifferent to her well-being that they couldn't even remember her age when they called emergency services. During the call, the dispatcher instructed them on how to perform first aid. Sheila attempted artificial respiration, and it seemed that Lacy briefly regained consciousness as the operator heard sounds coming from her. However, later investigations by police revealed that this was likely a ruse to mislead the dispatcher into believing the couple was genuinely following his advice. In fact, resuscitation was impossible. Lacy had died the day before. Gradually, people begin to accept the situation, but it's important to note that this isn't a mental disorder. Sheila and Clay attempted to persuade the judge to give them a more lenient sentence, arguing that they had endured many years of suffering due to their daughter's condition. After 18 months of maintaining their innocence, the couple ultimately decided to plead guilty to manslaughter, likely in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence from the Supreme Court. The events shocked the local community, particularly the church members who knew Sheila and Clay. Many were taken aback by how calm the couple appeared despite the horrific circumstances. For 12 years, their daughter suffered in their home while Sheila, Clay managed to remain composed. Despite the prosecution's strong case, some community members continued to support the family. The defense team maintained that Sheila and Clay were innocent, portraying them as loving parents who supported their daughter until the end. The mother claimed she fed and bathed her daughter daily, although the daughter typically refused food in her final months. She also stated that she visited every day and sometimes slept on the couch next to her daughter, which she described as a peaceful experience. However, this claim raised suspicions, as the mother appeared well-groomed and it seemed unlikely she could sleep in a filthy environment filled with waste and insects. The prosecution requested a 40-year prison sentence, with many supporters arguing that the couple should be imprisoned for life, as they would not suffer like their daughter did. The court eventually sentenced Sheila and Clay Fletcher, who were responsible for caring for Lacy for the past 12 years, to 20 years in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shera and Leyon Brits. Our story takes place in a small town called Path, South Africa, with a population of about 3,000 people. In 1979, Leyon Brits was born there. He had a brother named Toki. Their father owned a local hotel and other businesses, providing a comfortable living for the family. Leyon was a bright and hard-working student who excelled in school and was active in sports. As a teenager, he started working in the family's hotel, learning to manage the business and assisting his father. Once his brother was old enough, the Leyon brothers worked together. The Leyon were a close-knit family, respected throughout the area. When Toki turned 18, he left their small town, but Leyon remained with his parents. Leyon dreamed of taking over the family hotel business, which frequently hosted large events and parties. At one of these events, Leyon noticed a stunning girl with chestnut hair and eyes. He couldn't stop looking at her and decided to introduce himself. However, the girl, Shera, had just turned 14, although she appeared older, while Leyon was already 25. Shera was born on September 6, 1990, and was the youngest of 4 siblings. Suretha's family lived in poverty, and their situation became worse when her father died of a poisonous spider bite. Her mother was left to raise 3 children on her own. Shera endured hardships with her family for many years. Suritha's family barely had enough money to buy food, making the future of the children very bleak. Then Leyon, who came from a wealthy family, met Shera and fell in love with her despite their large age gap. Shera, a schoolgirl, was also drawn to Leyon. They started talking, and Leyon pursued her with extravagance, taking her to fancy places and giving her expensive gifts. This left a strong impression on Shera, who was extremely grateful to Leyon. She realized she could build a future with him without lacking anything. Their relationship blossomed as Shera enjoyed Leyon's attention, and Leyon loved her very much. A few months later, Leyon expressed his wish to marry Shera, and his mother approved after meeting her. They then began dating officially, and their relationship seemed perfect. However, when Shera turned 15, her classmates noticed changes in her behavior. She started wearing loose-fitting clothes, avoided showing her belly, and became very shy, as if she didn't want to be approached. Eventually, Shera told Leyon that she suspected she might be pregnant. Leyon was very upset, as a pregnancy could result in accusations of statutory rape since he was already 26 years old. Leyon, who controlled the relationship, had initiated their intimacy. To address Suritha's suspicions, he gave her money to visit the clinic, where the doctor confirmed she was pregnant with twins. When she told Leyon the news, he became angry and insisted she not keep the pregnancy, giving her money for an abortion. Despite her hesitation, the pressure from Leyon and their age difference compelled her to comply. She went to the clinic alone and followed Leyon's demands. Leyon wasn't opposed to having a family and children, but he believed everything had its proper time and that they should wait until she was at least an adult. After the procedure, when Shera returned from the clinic, her mental health was severely impacted. Leyon thought that taking walks would help her recover quickly, not realizing she was in a lot of pain. Her emotional recovery needed more time. Shera eventually overcame the trauma, and their romantic relationship continued. Leyon still wanted children but asked her to wait. By the end of 2008, Shera was in her final year of school, preparing for her exams. At 18, she became pregnant again and told Leyon about it. Leyon was unhappy once more, but this time, Shera refused to have another abortion. She was now old enough to make her own decisions. Shera insisted on keeping the child and decided not to follow Leyon's wishes. He agreed. She graduated from school in early 2009 while pregnant. Shera and Leyon decided to get married. Although Leyon was uncertain about marriage, they had come too far in their relationship, so they went ahead with the wedding. Shera had her first child a year later, twin boys. The couple was very happy. After the twins were born, Leyon's father passed away, and his mother began to suffer from age-related problems that made it difficult for her to manage the family business. Leyon and his brother decided to put their mother in a nursing home so that she could receive proper care. Leyon then took full control of the hotel. During this time, he also owned a mining equipment store and a restaurant, both of which were aimed at serving miners by providing food at their workplaces. He also owned rental properties. These ventures generated a good income for the family, allowing them to live comfortably. Due to his heavy workload, Leyon decided to involve his wife in the family business. He didn't pressure her, as she had already wanted to start working in business. Leyon entrusted her with managing the equipment store. She began handling supplies while caring for their two young children, which made managing the business challenging. Although she couldn't take on a large workload, she managed to handle her responsibilities effectively. By this time, the children had grown up and started school. In South Africa, getting an education can be a challenge as not every small town has educational facilities and the quality is often subpar. Ensuring the best quality education often requires daily travel between cities. However, Suritha's family rented a house in a nearby major city for the duration of the children's schooling. Leyon decided to send the children to Kakumahi with Shera. She had to take care of the children herself and give up her business. They only visited Leyon on weekends to spend time with him. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time, the distance between the spouses became more apparent. The children couldn't communicate with their father regularly, and Shera rarely saw her husband. Their relationship grew much colder than it was at the beginning of their marriage. In 2017, Shera began experiencing health issues. She was diagnosed with cancer, heart problems, and arthritis. She underwent surgery to remove the tumor, which saved her life by preventing the disease from progressing. To address her other health issues, Shera started traveling to Johannesburg every month to receive special treatments from specialists at a clinic. All of this was funded by Leyon, who genuinely wanted to help Shera and supported her while continuing to manage the business. The biggest challenge during this period was taking care of the children, but the couple solved it by hiring a nanny to help. The family business was very profitable, and Leyon's workplace and home were both equipped with safes. Thanks to the extensive business, Leyon became wealthy, but at the cost of having to work long hours without days off. In addition, getting rich in a poor country is very dangerous. Because he had unintentionally attracted many people who were jealous of his life. Starting in 2017, Leyon encountered problems in his business, which led to many people publicly threatening him. At this time, Leyon confided in his wife that he felt unsafe and feared for his life. The couple discussed these issues regularly to ease his anxiety, but the situation did not improve. Gradually, the threats became a regular occurrence. Leyon began to ignore the threatening messages, as they came almost every day over trivial matters. A few years later, a terrible tragedy occurred on October 7, 2020. After a brief phone call with Shera, her husband returned home to check on the dogs. He then stopped communicating, which worried Shera. She decided to go home to check on him. That day, after arriving home and going inside, the house was strangely quiet and empty. Shera searched every room and finally discovered Leyon's body floating in the pool. In shock, she contacted Leyon's brother and then called the police to report her husband's death. Leyon's brother and the hotel manager were the first to arrive at the scene of the tragedy, followed shortly by the police. It was clear that Leyon's death was no accident. He had been brutally beaten before falling into the pool, suggesting that it was likely a targeted killing. Police quickly noticed that apart from a broken safe, no valuables had been stolen, despite the fact that there were plenty of items worth stealing in the house. This seemed unusual, as thieves usually stole anything of value. The case quickly attracted widespread attention and became a major topic in the South African media. Social networks are full of rumors and speculation. Rumor has it that the businessman has many serious enemies and has received threats. Some say that people who had quarrels with Leyon may have been involved in the case. The police receive reports from random people every day, and it takes them a long time to process so many false complaints. Initially, Leyon's brother Toki was suspected of being the culprit because he was seen at the crime scene shortly before Leyon's death. The suspected motive was their mother's will, which was kept in Leyon's safe, and Toki wanted to amend the document for fear of losing his inheritance. At the time, their mother was seriously ill and left a will. The police attempted to prove that there had been serious conflicts between them over the matter, but they were unsuccessful. Toki insisted that there had been no conflict, saying that his meetings with Leyon were very normal and that they did not usually argue about money. Toki sought comfort from Shera, who believed he was innocent and promised to find him the best lawyer. The housekeeper knew about the cameras in the house and informed the police, which gave them access to the footage. They also collected recordings from cameras at the entrance to the house. Briso Shurid, the housekeeper, was brought to the station to help identify the people in the footage. But she was unable to recognize anyone. The police had no solid leads. Leyon's brother Toki remains a suspect due to a possible inheritance dispute, but without evidence against him, the case has been dropped. A few months later, Jacques Van Vuren, 37, contacted the police and told the whole truth about Leyon's murder. Because the criminal wanted to confess, in exchange for a lighter sentence and agreed to expose all his accomplices. It turned out that in the Shera family, things were not as rosy as they seemed. The couple's distance not only cooled their relationship, but also completely destroyed it. One day, Shera took her husband's mobile phone and discovered photos of other women. At that time, she herself was unfaithful to Leyon. Shera was beautiful and attracted to many men. At the time of her marriage, she had a brief relationship with a lover. But during her medical treatment in Johannesburg, she developed a more serious relationship. She visited her lover every time she went to the hospital for treatment, during which time their relationship deepened. She considered leaving her husband. This seemed pretty straightforward since they lived in separate homes and rarely communicated. Not long after, she asked her husband for a divorce. It is unclear whether she simply wanted to end her relationship with her husband to be with her lover or whether she intended to marry him. Leyon did not know about the betrayal, but he was shocked by his wife's desire for a divorce. At first, he reacted very violently and expressed his grief. Then he calmed down and threatened that if she filed for divorce, he would take everything from her, including money and children. Memories of her poor childhood still haunted her. Due to pressure from her husband, Shera had to give up her plans. She no longer loved her husband Leyon, but she did not want to lose everything. In desperation, Shera turned to her lover, who lived near Johannesburg, to see if he could help her leave her husband. She repeatedly asked him for help, but he refused. He tried to convince her that it was a bad idea. Eventually, she stopped making these requests. One day, Shera was talking to her lover. During the conversation, she said that she no longer had to worry about her husband because a classmate was willing to help resolve the situation. At first, her lover took these words as a joke and the couple never brought up the subject again. However, it was not a joke. Shera was actually talking to her classmate, Jacques Van Vuren. At the time, Jacques was going through a difficult time. He had just divorced and his ex-wife had moved out with the children. He had also been injured at work, forcing him to reduce his hours and income. Despite this, he still had to pay child support, which led to serious financial difficulties. In the face of these difficulties, Jacques relapsed into drug addiction, which drove his wife away from him. Shera and Jacques met again by chance at a barbecue, where he confided in her about his troubles. Shera decided to take advantage of this opportunity. She had obtained Jacques' phone number. Shera contacted Jacques. She said that her husband had been abusing her for years, so she wanted to get away from his control. And Jacques believed her. He was extremely disgusted by Leyon's behavior. Shera had reached Jacques' limit, as he had had a difficult childhood. He lived with an abusive father who had physically and mentally abused him, leaving him traumatized, and Saritha's story was effective. Finally, he agreed to help Shera resolve her situation. She promised to pay 400,000 rand, a large sum that could help Jacques solve all his financial problems. During this time, Leyon's business was struggling. His hardware store and restaurant had also closed. The estate was abandoned and did not generate any income. The Leyon family had been living off their savings, but with the high costs of maintaining their lifestyle, their financial reserves began to run out. In this context, Leyon often quarreled with his wife. Their relationship began to fall apart, which only made the situation worse. Finally, Shera decided to get rid of her husband again. She contacted Jacques, who asked for half the money in advance. Shera withdrew 70,000 rand and met Jacques to discuss the plan. She promised to give the remaining money through her housekeeper, who worked for Leyon and had moved into her house to help with the housework. The next day, she gave Jacques an envelope containing 1,000 rand. With the deposit, Jacques hired his university friend Enrich Williams. Enrich initially refused to participate in the murder, but due to financial difficulties, when Jacques offered him a large sum of money, he could not resist and agreed. Enrich was 34 at the time and worried that he couldn't handle Leyon on his own. So he found a place to stay, Amantal Bariki, a recent college graduate. Amantal, just 24, had studied engineering and dreamed of building his own house. Like many others, he was struggling financially. When he was told of the amount of money involved, Amantal agreed to help. Then the plan entered a careful preparation phase. Shera filmed a video showing the layout of the house and discussed the attack with the criminals. Shera let the criminals into the house so they could hide behind a large sofa in the living room. Her role was to lure her husband into the house while she was receiving treatment in Johannesburg. Jacques was not allowed in the area because witnesses could identify him as a friend of the couple. So Enrich and Amantal had to carry out the attack. Shera insisted that the attack looked like a robbery, so she allowed the criminals to take whatever they wanted from the house. She also asked that Saritha's beloved dogs be kept safe. To distract the dogs, they bought a package of sausages. The sausages were scattered around the yard to lure the dogs away. A rehearsal was scheduled for early October, but was cancelled when Leyon's brother Toki visited on October 5th and stayed overnight. The attackers had everything ready and planned to burn clothes and any other evidence after the murder to avoid leaving any clues for the police. While waiting for the signal to start, Jacques tried to calm down. He broke his rule of staying away from the area where Leyon would be killed by driving past the house several times before returning to wait for the signal to continue. At around 6 a.m. the next day, while Leyon was at work, the attackers entered the house and hid behind the sofa. At 10 a.m., Shera called Leyon to say that, according to the housekeeper, the dogs were missing. Leyon needed to go back to look for them, which seemed normal to him, so he returned to the house, unaware that his attackers were waiting inside. As Leyon entered the living room and turned around, the attack began. He was stabbed in the back by Amantal with a knife. Despite being caught off guard, Leyon fought back. During the struggle, Enrich grabbed a baseball bat and began beating Leyon. Leyon fell to the ground. He was stabbed 8 times, and then they used a dog collar to strangle him to death before stealing his wallet. They then carried Leyon and threw him into the pool. Then went back into the house, opened the safe, and stole money in diamonds. They fled the scene after carrying out their plan. At the time, Shera was in Johannesburg for treatment, which gave her an alibi. After learning about the incident, Shera returned home, where she discovered her husband's body. Later, when Shera was invited to the police station to view the surveillance camera footage, she noticed her old school friend Jacques in the video. Although his face was not visible, the footage captured his car driving suspiciously past their house twice. Shera did not claim to recognize the car, but the police took notice of it, although the license plate was unclear. While the investigation was ongoing, Shera used a disposable phone to avoid detection and keep their conversations from being monitored. It turned out that Shera had provided the police with information regarding Toki and tried to blame him for her husband's death. Shera had gone to great lengths to play the role of a grieving widow. Even after the funeral, Toki remained unsuspecting and continued to contact Shera, supporting her during this difficult time. During this time, Toki began to notice significant changes in Saritha's behavior. She no longer appeared to be a grieving widow. In fact, she had gotten a tattoo, despite Leyon's constant objection to her getting one. In addition, Shera began riding a motorcycle, which Leyon was also adamantly against. She began wearing more revealing and provocative clothing, along with heavy, aggressive makeup, which had always annoyed Leyon when he was alive. Despite all these changes, Toki remains unaware of Suritha's involvement in the crime. During this time, Shera suffered financial hardship as her family assets were frozen due to the ongoing investigation. She was unable to pay the remaining 200,000 rand to the killers and had no personal savings. The killers became angry and began to threaten her. Jacques regularly contacted her to demand money, but Shera continued to delay payment by insisting that the assets were still frozen. The situation became so bad that she hired a bodyguard to move into her home. The bodyguard began helping to look after the children, leading neighbors to assume that he was her new partner. Jacques also received threats from Enrich and Mantle, the killers, as he was responsible for paying the remaining amount to them, but he could not do so without money from Shera. On one occasion, Jacques went to visit his sister and received several threats along the way, which made him fearful. Under emotional pressure, he confessed to his sister about the murder, and she informed their mother. His sister then tried to convince him to go to the police and confess, and he finally agreed. This led to the full truth about the murder being revealed. When the police arrived at Suritha's house, she said that she was upset because Leyon did not approve her divorce and refused to pay for her medical treatment. However, there was no evidence in their correspondence to substantiate her claims. The possible motive for her decision to kill her husband was that he was planning to sell the dilapidated hotel. She, who had become accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, did not want to sell it. Meanwhile, Leyon's main goal in selling the hotel was to pay off his debts and spend more time with his family. He had neglected his children and wife, so he planned to retire and pursue a quieter, more settled life with them. Unfortunately, this decision eventually led to his death. Jacques van Vuren was sentenced to 25 years in prison, eligible for parole in up to 5 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. In exchange for his cooperation, he agreed to testify against others involved in the massacre. Enrich Williams and Amantal Bariki were also arrested and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Leyon Brits. On March 19, 2021, police arrested Shera Brits. She quickly pleaded guilty to murder and armed robbery. As a result, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder and 15 years in prison for armed robbery, both sentences to run concurrently. Because she pleaded guilty, she will have the opportunity to be paroled with minimal restrictions. Throughout the trial, Shera portrayed herself as the victim in her relationship with Leyon, which began when she was 14 years old. He pressured her to have an abortion and controlled many aspects of her life. Although there was no evidence of physical violence or suffering, the Supreme Court accepted her claims. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Victoria Nazerova. It's hard to shock police officers who regularly deal with serious crimes, but sometimes, extreme cruelty and cynicism cross all boundaries. This was the case for New York City Police Department officers with more than 20 years of crime-fighting experience. They encountered a situation so unique that it left them stunned. On September 2, 2016, police received a call from a woman named Olga Tsvyk, 35. She reported a robbery. Police arrived at her home. Olga, an immigrant from Ukraine and an eyelash extension artist, told the police that several valuables were missing from her bedroom. She explained to them that she had just been to the hospital due to severe dizziness and nausea. Police interviewed Olga to understand the details of the incident. She recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Nazerova, who had previously visited her salon. Victoria often acted as if she and Olga were friends, despite not knowing each other. On that day, Victoria was particularly pushy, insisting on getting urgent eyelash extensions done at home. Olga told Victoria that Olga only did it at the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to her was useless, and Victoria would not give in, so Olga had to agree to take her to her home. After a while, Olga also told the police that she refused to go out with Victoria, while Victoria constantly asked her to go out with her. An interesting detail emerged. Victoria looked very much like Olga, which often confused Olga. During the police interview, it was revealed that Victoria had come to Olga's apartment and brought 3 slices of cheesecake from the best local bakery. Victoria eagerly ate 2 slices and insisted that Olga take the 3rd. After a short tea with cheesecakes, Olga began to feel unwell. When Victoria left, Olga became violently nauseous and then passed out for about 30 minutes. Olga woke up and immediately called 911, and she was taken to hospital by ambulance. However, doctors found no traces of drugs in her blood. After returning home, she noticed that some valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. Initially, the police did not believe her story. They suspected that Olga might be under the influence of illegal substances and thought that she was imagining the whole situation. She was behaving strangely, seemed lethargic and looked unwell. The police concluded that her claim of encountering a woman who looked exactly like her was likely fabricated. However, Olga strongly denied using any illegal substances, and she believed that she may have been poisoned by a piece of cheesecake she had eaten. The police conducted a preliminary examination of the scene and discovered a box of cakes in the trash. Olga identified it as the same box of cheesecake that Victoria had brought. The police collected the box as evidence because it had baking residue. Although forensic analysis could determine whether the cheesecake caused Olga's problems, tests showed nothing unusual. However, Olga insisted that the cheesecake was the cause. She said that she was taken to the hospital and examined by doctors, but they found nothing unusual about her. The police followed up by contacting the hospital for information about Olga's condition and tests. Doctors refused to share details, out of compliance with confidentiality policies, which made police suspicious of Olga's complaints. The client Olga had told them about was nowhere to be found, so the case was adjourned until new information about the case came to light. The next day, a neighbor discovered a suspicious woman in Olga's apartment. The woman came and went several times, loitering around Olga's apartment. When she saw the neighbor coming, the strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and quickly left the building. The neighbor saw Olga's apartment door open and went to check on her. When she entered, the neighbor found Olga's apartment unbearably stuffy. The heating was on full blast despite the summer temperature of 30 degrees. Olga was still alive but unconscious. She was lying in bed, but wearing an unusual combination of revealing underwear and warm sweatpants. Pills were scattered around Olga. The neighbor then quickly called 911. After the police arrived, the neighbor described the strange woman. With dark hair, attractive and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, the police were convinced that the identical woman was not a product of Olga's imagination. The police then actively investigated the case. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene where the perpetrator wanted to stage a voluntary death. The police suspected that Victoria, a regular customer who bought cheesecakes at a store, was involved in the crime. The police began to search for Victoria, but they had no clues, no information about who she was or her photo. However, later, a private detective approached the police department. He was a former police officer who had been monitoring the violent activities of the scammer for a long time. He had been following Victoria online, where she advertised her escort services on a dating website and through social media. The private investigator believes that Victoria used online advertising to find victims for her crimes, and the plan worked perfectly. Victoria would go to her next client's home, then drug them with a psychotropic drug to knock them unconscious. She would then take everything of value and flee. After her recovery, Olga shared her poisoning experience on social media. Then, one of her clients unexpectedly mentioned that she knew a man named Ruben Barikov who had a similar story. Ruben, a dry cleaner, had met Victoria on a Russian dating site just a few months before Olga was poisoned. Victoria invited Ruben to her home, bringing her cooking skills with her. He accepted the invitation, but after tasting her dishes, he passed out. While he was unconscious, she stole his expensive watch, cash, and credit cards. Ruben later realized that he had been drugged with a powerful substance that nearly killed him. When he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners and told Ruben's co-workers that he was drunk. She then left. Only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The police said the situation was serious and that it was fortunate that the two victims survived. In 2017, a private investigator assisted a Russian client in finding a fugitive. Nadia Ford hired a private investigator after her biological mother, Alla Alexenko, went missing. Nadia lives in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. She was originally from Kodar. Her mother, Alla Alexenko, raised her daughter and son alone, and she had a difficult time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the United States since she was a child, and her dream came true when she came to the United States to study in 2007. There, she met a man whom she married and took his last name, Ford. However, the marriage did not work out and the couple divorced. Nadia stayed in the United States and successfully settled there. She still maintains a close relationship with her mother, who was alone at the time. Her mother, Alla, sold the house she found difficult to maintain and moved into an apartment. In early 2013, Nadia's mother got a new neighbor, Victoria. Despite the significant age gap, Victoria quickly became friends with Nadia's mother. Alla introduced his daughter, who was living in the United States, to Victoria, and this inspired Victoria to travel to the United States to meet her neighbor's daughter. Alla arranged their meeting, and in September 2013, Victoria flew to New York. There, she met Nadia and they became close. To Nadia, her mother's friend seemed like a kind and pleasant person. Victoria wanted to stay in the United States and Nadia gave her some advice. Unfortunately, Victoria's plans failed and she returned to Russia. Despite this setback, she kept in close contact with Alla. In the fall of 2014, Victoria planned another trip to the United States and informed Alla of her plans. She also told Alla that she could deliver gifts to Alla's daughter if needed. Alla then asked Victoria to bring her more than $6,000 in cash and 2 precious mink coats to her daughter Nadia. However, Victoria repeatedly delayed the trip for various reasons, causing Alla to worry about whether Victoria would actually make it and what would happen to her gifts. Worried, Alla even called his daughter to express his concerns. Nadia reassured her mother and suggested that she reclaim her belongings. On February 4, 2014, Alla was very excited and called his daughter Nadia to share her joy. She finally decided to talk to Victoria, who agreed to return her valuables. However, this did not happen, and Alla soon disappeared. Alla stopped answering his phone, which had never happened before. Alla had always kept in touch with his daughter and they called each other every day. Nadia contacted Victoria and asked her about her mother. Victoria confirmed that she had seen her and they had a chat over tea, but after that, she never saw Alla again. According to Victoria, Alla had gone somewhere, but she did not know where. Alla's son also tried to contact his mother and even went to Alla's apartment. But she was not at home and did not answer his calls. A few days later, Nadia and her brother both received unexpected text messages from an unknown number claiming to be from their mother Alla. The message told them not to look for Alla because she was happy. The language in the message was not Alla's style, which made them even more worried. Realizing that something was seriously wrong, Nadia booked the earliest flight to Russia and went to Kodar to help investigate her mother's disappearance. Nadia first went to her mother's apartment, but the apartment was empty. The valuables that were supposed to be given to Victoria were also missing. Worried, Nadia went to the police to report her suspicions about Victoria, saying that it was the neighbor who had not returned her mother's valuables. The police saw that they had gathered information and decided to take action. Nadia then contacted Victoria to arrange a meeting. During their conversation, Nadia demanded to know the whereabouts of her mother Alla. Victoria became defensive, shouted that she did not know where Alla was, and quickly left for her apartment. Overhearing this exchange, the police decided to visit Victoria at her home. During their visit, she managed to convince them that she had nothing to do with the disappearance, and they found no evidence against her. Nadia returned to her mother's apartment and looked around carefully. She noticed that although her mother had been away for several days, the apartment was spotless, as if someone had just cleaned it. She also discovered that important items, including jewelry and 50,000 rubles, were missing. Nadia considered calling the police, but the police, who had spoken to Victoria, convinced her that her mother had gone on a trip with the money and jewelry and would be back soon. Despite this, Nadia felt uneasy and believed that her mother was in danger. Nadia actively searched for her mother Alla by printing flyers with her mother's picture and distributing them around the neighborhood. She contacted her mother's friends and relatives, but no one knew where she was. Nadia also corresponded with Victoria, begging her to bring her mother back and even offering a generous reward, but Victoria denied everything. Nadia did not give up hope that she would find her mother alive and continued her search efforts, regularly visiting the police and checking the news, but so far, there has been no information about her mother's fate. To assist in the search, Nadia hired a private investigator, who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother, Alla, went missing. Surveillance footage obtained by the investigator from October 5, 2014, showed the rental car driving on the highway outside of town. There were two people inside the car, Victoria, who was driving, and a woman sitting motionless in the front passenger seat. Nadia later realized that the woman was her mother, Alla. Nadia went to the police with the information she had. The police confirmed that Victoria had rented the car in question and invited her in for questioning. During the interview, Victoria admitted that she had driven the rental car on the morning of October 5th but insisted that there was no one else in the car with her. She agreed to take a lie detector test, but after the test, she was released pending the results. Ultimately, the results showed that Victoria had failed the lie detector test, making her the prime suspect in the case. The police planned to arrest her, but she took advantage of her release and boarded the first flight out of the country without informing them. Meanwhile, the police began to actively search for Alla. Nadia stayed in Russia for another 6 months, participating in the investigation. She hoped that her mother was still alive and appealed to the authorities for assistance. Meanwhile, the police checked the rental car's route, which led them to Victoria's hometown of Armavir. The search for Alla began there, and Nadia's hopes of her mother returning home safely were dashed when the police gave her the bad news. In April 2015, charred remains were found about 3 hours away from Alla's residence in the same forested area. Nadia was able to identify her mother by her teeth, as the rest of her body was severely burned and unrecognizable. The cause of death could not be determined. After the identification, an arrest warrant was issued for Victoria Nazerova and sent to Interpol. However, it took some time for the fugitive to be found. After her mother's funeral, Nadia returned to the United States. She was unable to work because she was so distraught over her mother's death. Eventually, she found the strength to move forward and vowed to seek justice for her mother, ensuring that those responsible were punished. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a photo of Victoria on social media, where the wanted woman was flaunting her lavish lifestyle in Mexico. Nadia reported Victoria's location to the U.S. police, who then began an investigation. At this point, Nadia decided to hire one of the top private investigators in the country to speed up the case. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, which Nadia could not afford because she had been unemployed for months while searching for her mother. The private investigator checked Victoria's social media photos and discovered evidence that she was in the United States. In the selfies, the reflection in the sunglasses showed the dashboard of a car. After examining hundreds, possibly thousands of vehicles, the detective identified the car as a Chrysler 300. He also discovered that the most recent photos of Victoria were taken in the Russian Sheepshead Bay neighborhood of Brooklyn. By searching the Chrysler database in that area, they were able to narrow down their search and find Victoria. Despite the challenges, they found her residence, where she was living with her boyfriend in an apartment complex. Remarkably, the Chrysler was registered to her boyfriend. Victoria probably didn't even realize that the case had taken such a turn and that Interpol was hunting her worldwide, so she fearlessly posted her photos online, not realizing that she might be exposing herself. The detective identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It was soon discovered that her boyfriend had fallen victim to Victoria, who had escaped using a well-known poisoning method. Tragically, she had also poisoned his beagle, which had died. This sparked public outrage against Victoria and increased interest in Nadia's investigation into the crime. On March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria was arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were relieved to have her arrested. It was dangerous to let her go free. During a search of Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga Tsvy's identity card, revealing that Olga had been the victim of a dangerous criminal. Victoria not only needed money and valuables, but also a passport identical to Olga's. Her temporary visa was about to expire, and using someone else's ID would allow her to avoid returning to Russia, where she would have to stand trial. Police believe that Victoria planned to kill Olga and wanted to live under Olga's identity. But her plan failed and Olga survived because her neighbor intervened. The remains of the cheesecake were sent back to the lab for testing, and this time, a more thorough analysis found an illegal drug in the baked goods. The investigation found that Victoria had used this drug, usually a sedative, on all of her victims. However, she used a higher dose to ensure that they would pass out. Olga was lucky; she survived after eating the cheesecake. The high temperature in her apartment was no accident. In fact, the heat increased the effects of the drug, which could have even led to death. Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as any connection to the attempted murder of Olga and the other victims. It was revealed that Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but that case never progressed. More incidents later came to light where she had been involved in theft by meeting men online, visiting their homes, drugging their drinks, and stealing their possessions. Most of the men chose not to report the matter to the police due to concerns about publicity, allowing Victoria to evade arrest. The lengthy preparation of the case delayed the trial by about 6 years. The trial finally began in January 2023 and received extensive media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria refused to testify and remained silent. The details surrounding Alla Alexenko's death could not be discussed in court because the crime occurred in another country. Victoria's defense attorney pointed out that there was no evidence or testimony to prove that Victoria poisoned the cheesecake or forced Olga to eat it. Olga testified that Victoria brought 3 slices of cheesecake to her apartment and ate 2 in front of her, which made Olga feel safe eating the remaining 1. The prosecution argued that this was intentional, claiming Victoria added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one would be eaten. Therefore, Olga accidentally ate the drugged cheesecake. After careful deliberation, the jury found Victoria Nazerova guilty of second-degree murder. Although the maximum sentence for the crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, she could apply for parole after serving 15 years. Victoria's troubles began during the 6 years she waited for trial. There was no trace of the beautiful and stylish woman she had once been. Her wealthy life had collapsed in an instant. Life in prison was harsh. During her incarceration, she complained of poor nutrition. An attack in prison left her scarred and nearly blind. Victoria sued the prison, alleging negligence on the part of the warden who failed to help her. The dispute was settled by paying her $325,000. During her interrogation at the prison, Victoria maintained her innocence of all charges, including the case involving Olga. She maintained that she had nothing to do with the cheesecake poisoning and claimed that she had eaten the cheesecake herself without any problems. According to Victoria, she had only shared a piece with Olga and had not forced her to eat it. After serving her sentence in a U.S. prison, she will be deported to Russia to stand trial for the murder of Alla Alexenko. Nadia was relieved that Victoria was in prison and would finally face the consequences of her actions. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Dio Galves. Albufeira, a beautiful resort town, is one of the most visited places in the Algarve region of southern Portugal. It was there, in 1999, that Diogo was born. He is the only child of a poor but hard-working family whose income mainly depended on the of tourism. Diogo's parents saw him as a good son, and those who knew him described him as decent, responsible, hard-working, and reliable. He was also a very outgoing young man who loved being surrounded by friends and family. Diogo went to high school in his hometown. After graduating, he started studying computer science. To fund his education and support his family, he got a job at McDonald's in 2015 when he was just 16. At 17, while still working there, his life became miserable when his father suffered a stroke and fell into a vegetative state, as reported by the media. That same year, while Diogo and his mother were dealing with his father's health crisis, another tragedy struck. His mother, who had always supported his learning and growth, was hit by a car on her way to work at the mall, where she cleaned. The car dragged her several meters, leading to her falling into a ditch where she died from her injuries. Although the driver fled, but the police identified him and he faced trial. While he was waiting for the conviction of the person responsible for his parents' suffering, Diogo needed to be transferred to a medical unit where he received the necessary care. His maternal aunt, worried about his situation, had suggested that he move in with her. However, they had a serious disagreement, and after a few weeks, it became impossible for them to continue living together. Diogo explained what was happening to his friend, who offered him a room in his house in the Aldea neighborhood, also in Albufeira. At the time, the closeness to the friend's relatives helped Diogo feel at home. Despite his young age, Diogo demonstrated great ability to handle and overcome difficult situations with patience and optimism. In 2017, at just 18 years old, Diogo graduated with a degree in computer technology and completed a 6-month internship at Vila Vita Park, a leading 5-star hotel. His impressive work led the executives to offer him a position as a technician. In 2018, Diogo accepted the offer and left his job at a fast food restaurant chain, where he had worked for nearly a year and had become a duty manager. This thing a new chapter in his life, filled with opportunities to advance after overcoming difficult times. After working at the company for some time and anticipating better days ahead, he decided to buy a car. Diogo got along well with his co-workers, especially Maria Malvero, a 19-year-old security guard at the hotel. Maria, like Diogo, comes from a family with difficult circumstances and faces her own challenges. Her mother had mental health issues, and her father left when she was very young, she never spoke to him again. Maria, interested in martial arts, practiced karate and aspired to be a police officer. However, her application to the police academy was rejected due to her tattoo. Disappointed, she decided to study at Securinfo, a company that trains security guards in various private security fields. Diogo was interested in Maria and made his feelings known from the start, but she did not feel the same way and treated him coldly. Fabio Acosta, a close friend of Diogo, said that Diogo was deeply in love with Maria. He was so infatuated that he declined a well-paying job offer from the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon because he didn't want to be away from her. Additionally, he would bring her meals when she was working. Over time, they became very close, and people around them assumed they were a couple. However, there was no romantic relationship between them. Maria told Diogo she didn't want anything to do with him because she had just ended a toxic relationship with a naval officer, yet she was still giving him false hopes. Diogo never gave up hope for a future with Maria and sought opportunities to be near her and make her happy in various ways. One day, he was deeply disappointed when he saw a video on social media of Maria kissing another girl. Diogo was upset because he believed she should have told him that she wasn't interested in men and that this was why they could never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, tried to reassure him by saying that girls often do this, but Diogo was not convinced. He insisted that she had lied to him and that was why she had rejected him. Despite the disappointment, Diogo and Maria stayed friends, and she continued to accept his gifts and invitations for dates. Several times, Diogo offered to walk her home, but she always said her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and she didn't want to bring another man into the apartment. As time went on, in December 2019, Diogo learned that he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which had occurred 3 years earlier. After receiving the payment amount of up to €70,000, Diogo decided it was time to buy a house to avoid continuing to pay rent. He shared the good news with his friend Maria, who left her job at the hotel a few weeks later. Maria stated that she could no longer stand the colleagues' comments about the relationship between her and Diogo. She also explained that she wanted to spend more time with her mother, who needed a lot of attention due to a mental illness. At that moment, there was no reason to doubt her words. However, subsequent incidents suggest that her decision to leave the hotel was motivated by dark reasons, and this is where the third character in the story, Mariana Fonseca, 20 years old, comes in. Mariana worked as a nurse at the hospital and had a dear relationship with Maria. They both lived together in Mariana's parents' house, because they still do not have enough money to have their own home where they could enjoy their relationship. When Maria discovered the substantial amount of money Diogo, she started getting closer to he. It seems Maria shared this information with Mariana, and they decide to trick Diogo in order to gain access to his bank account and steal the compensation money. After Maria repeatedly refused to date Diogo, one day, she told him she wanted to spend a romantic evening with him. This was a significant surprise for Diogo, who was overjoyed and couldn't believe his luck. After waiting for so long, he was ecstatic about finally being with the girl he loved. They planned the meeting for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was thrilled and didn't question why Maria had suddenly changed her mind. Maria and Mariana had different accounts of the incident that day, but here are the facts according to media reports based on official information. When Diogo entered, Maria offered him some orange juice she had brought. However, the drink contained an unexpected ingredient, diindawomethane, DIM, a drug affecting the central nervous system, with analgesic and sedative properties. Maria using the drug, which she had stolen from the hospital. Her plan was to sedate Diogo, access his banking information, and manipulate his fingers to unlock his phone. Mariana waited in a car outside while Maria executed the plan. Mariana even texted she several times to check if the drug had taken effect, as it was taking longer than expected. The situation inside the house became increasingly more tense. Diogo didn't understand what was happening and started to feel anxious. Maria then tries to calm him down by promising to show him an erotic dance, but first she has to tie him to a table. After being restrained for a few minutes, Diogo panicked and asked Maria to release him, but she became aggressive, leading to a struggle. Using her martial arts skills, she subdued Diogo by knocking him to the floor and choking him, prevent him from breathing. According to Mariana's testimony, Maria later instructed her to enter the apartment. Upon entering, Mariana found Diogo on the floor. She questioned Maria about the incident and criticized her for going beyond their plans, which was to steal his keys and take his money. Seeing Diogo unresponsive, Mariana began resuscitation efforts. When he woke up, he was extremely agitated and attempted to attack she. It seems he realized that Mariana was plotting against him, led him to try to defend himself. In response to Diogo's aggression towards Mariana, Maria intervened by grabbing him from behind, bringing him to the ground, and restraining him by squeezing his neck again. Diogo's life ended tragically at the hands of the girl he loved, Maria. His body was found in the living room of Maria and Mariana's house, where they continued with their planned robbery. They first severed his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, access a mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process took several days because there was a limit on the amount that could be transferred each day. When he learned that Diogo had work scheduled the next day, Mariana and Maria tried to prevent his colleagues from noticing his absence, searching for him, and reporting him missing. One of Diogo's colleagues received a text from his number stating that he couldn't make it to work that day and needed someone to cover for him. Diogo's colleague, who disliked last-minute shift changes, found the request odd. Diogo asked if everything was okay and received a simple yes in response. The conversation among Diogo's co-worker and others continued throughout Friday and part of Saturday, but the unusual messages increasingly seemed uncharacteristic of him. One person receiving these messages was Diogo's supervisor. One message said that Diogo wouldn't be returning to work because he had met a woman in France and planned to move in with her. This explanation seemed odd to the supervisor because Diogo was a responsible employee and wouldn't leave his job so abruptly. To find the answer, the supervisor attempted to call Diogo but received no answer. Later, he got a message stating that Diogo was not in to talk on the phone. The supervisor responded, saying he could only feel reassured if they spoke. He wanted to hear Diogo's voice and wanted to know what was happening. Diogo's loved ones reacted to messages sent by Maria and Mariana, in which they pretended to be Diogo. This prompted they to alter their plan for explaining Diogo's sudden disappearance. They decided to make it appear as if Diogo had ended his life and planned to dismember his body to get rid of the evidence. Maria later mentioned that their actions were inspired by the TV show Dexter, featuring a forensic scientist who killed criminals and disguised his crimes by dismembering their bodies. After executing their horrific plan, Mariana and Maria placed Diogo's body in trash bags in the trunk of their car. They then went to an ATM and shopped at a mall, where they were seen hugging and laughing on security cameras. Following this, they returned to Mariana's home to begin dismembering Diogo's body. Ultimately, they put Diogo's torso in a black bag and discarded the other parts in a container. Meanwhile, Diogo's friends launched a campaign to report him as missing and reached out to the authorities. The authorities then waited the required 48 hours before officially declaring him missing. Mariana and Maria left the house, with Maria getting into Diogo's car to drive to a cliff near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. Mariana followed behind in her own car. Around 2 p.m. that day, Mariana threw Diogo's torso off the cliff and abandoned his car nearby. They planned to make it seem like he had jumped voluntarily. However, instead of falling into the sea, the remains got stuck on a rock. Finally, Mariana and Maria drove together in Mariana's car for about 12 minutes, covering 7 kilometers, to the Inferno Dago waterfall in Tavira, where they disposed of the rest of Diogo's body in the water. Shortly after, Diogo's car was discovered in a parking lot near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. A newspaper report stated that 2 laptops were found inside the car, led forensic police to investigate. A land and sea search was launched, leading to the discovery of a young man's torso partially covered by a black garbage bag. Meanwhile, at another location along the coast, a French couple found the young man's head at Inferno Toigo. Diogo's hands and feet were later recovered during an intensive police search. The investigators assigned to the case found the details surrounding Diogo's death unusual. They noted that he was a quiet man who don't hang out with bad people. As the police continued their investigation, they discovered that Diogo had received a significant payout following his mother's death. While examining money orders, they found that a large sum had been transferred from Diogo's account to someone named Maria. Naturally, the detectives' next move was to locate Maria to understand why she had received money from Diogo. Maria attempted to persuade the police that she killed Diogo in self-defense, claiming he was trying to abuse her. She stated that this was why she had left the hotel prior to the incident. However, a review of the text messages between Diogo and Maria, they showed that her claims were false. After Maria stopped working, she and Diogo grew close. During her initial meeting with the police, Maria insisted that she was entirely responsible for planning and carrying out the incident that led to the shooting. Maria clarified that Mariana was not involved in the crime at all. However, Mariana's account of the incident contradicted what Maria's claimed. Mariana reported that Maria to wanting to steal Diogo's money and intended to kill him. She stated that Maria's plan was to make him suffer in order to extract his bank account password. Investigators gathered enough evidence to convict both girls, Mariana and Maria, including phone records, the Diogo's cell phone, and ATM surveillance footage. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and faced court in June of that year. The judge carefully reviewed the incidents that Maria described. Maria remained steadfast in her confession and denied any involvement Mariana's. She stated that Diogo's body was in a suitcase in a car parked in the garage for 2 days, and it was there that the dismemberment took place, while Mariana's family was sleeping. After hearing Maria's detailed testimony about the incidents, the judge repeatedly asked her Mariana was during the dismemberment, as which had been done with surgical precision at the joints. All attention in the courtroom turned to the nurse, Mariana. She anticipated the questions and clarified that, since everyone was aware of her employment at the hospital, they mistakenly thought she was responsible for dismembering the corpse. She said that dismemberment could easily be done by using information on the internet. The judge imposed a detention order on both Mariana and Maria, citing that they had committed a serious crime in a creepy, calculated, reckless, and extremely brutal manner. A few months later, on February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony on February 26, 2021, Maria claimed that she initially wanted revenge on Diogo because he had abused her, but did not intend to kill him. She admitted that her goal was to humiliate him and clarified that Mariana had no relationship with Diogo. Mariana and Maria attended court together but did not make eye contact during the trial. It is rumored that after the arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their friendship. The trial included testimonies from several witnesses, including forensic expert Teresa Costa. She explained that the level of diphenhydramine found in Diogo's blood was much lower than expected from the 3 ampoules, suggesting that he either did not take the prescribed dose or had taken it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Maria Malvero was convicted of several serious crimes, including aggravated murder, destroy the body, robbery, unauthorized access, fraud, carjacking, and possession of an illegal weapon. As a result, she received a 25-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay €265,000 in compensation to Diogo's father. Mariana Fonseca, on the other hand, was acquitted of murder but found guilty of destroy the body, complicity, and fraud. She received a 4-year prison sentence but was released because none of her convictions required pre-trial detention, at least until the final sentencing. The court determined that Mariana's effort to save life Diogo indicated that she did not intend to kill him. The judge based his decision on a confession from she, in which she accepted full responsibility for her actions. However, this verdict was not accepted by the Portuguese public, who viewed Mariana as equally guilty of the serious crime against Diogo alongside Maria. After the verdict, Mariana exited the courtroom through a separate exit where her father, who had attended all the hearings, was waiting. Neither of them spoke to the media.